When Chen Huiyan caught the aloof school beauty, Lin Nianchu, scavenging in his family's supermarket, he immediately recorded it on his phone. As she tried to flee, he pinned her hand down, jokingly declaring her under arrest. The young girl trembled in fear, but he had no intention of letting her go. In his previous life, he had let her leave to spare her feelings, only to learn she died in a car crash the very next day. Reborn, he was determined to keep her alive, but since he didn't know the exact time of the accident, he had to stall her. Willing to keep her overnight if it meant saving her life, Chen Huiyan pulled her into a quiet corner. Putting on a wicked grin, he played the recording, threatening to show it to their teachers and classmates if she didn't cooperate. Lin Nianchu's cheeks flushed crimson, her tarry eyes silently pleading for mercy. Ignoring her puppy dog look, he held out his hand and ordered her to hand over whatever she had taken, warning her that she wouldn't like it if he had to search her himself. He coldly reminded her that his father owned the supermarket. Blinking back tears, Lin Nianchu silently reached into her bag and pulled out 3 loaves of bread. Chen Huiyan was stunned to see she had taken the cheapest ones available. He couldn't help but wonder why, if she was going to steal, she didn't at least grab a chicken leg or some sausages. Without warning, he grabbed her backpack and dumped all its contents onto the table, revealing textbooks and summer homework. Along with her school supplies and a broken pencil case, a single sanitary pad tumbled out. Lin Nianchu's face instantly drained of color. She lunged forward, desperately snatching the pad and hiding it in her hand before yanking her bag back. But as she pulled, the worn strap completely snapped. With red, tearful eyes, she weakly glared at him, stammering that she had only taken 3 loaves of bread. Refusing to drop his bully act, Chen Huiyan glared right back, snatched the broken bag away, and tossed it onto the table. Feigning disbelief, he asked if she really expected him to believe she brought a whole backpack just to steal cheap bread. As he slowly stepped closer, the panicked girl shrank back, crossing her arms defensively. Glancing at her slightly bulky jacket, he accused her of hiding more stolen goods and ordered her to take it off. When she frantically denied it, he cut her off, threatening once again to expose her to the whole school if he had to strip the jacket off himself. Terrified, she slowly reached for her zipper and pulled it down. Beneath the jacket was a wrinkled t-shirt that revealed her slender neck and delicate collarbones. Chen Huiyan was briefly taken aback by how pale and frail she looked. Humiliated, Lin Nianchu fought back tears and asked if he was finally satisfied that she wasn't hiding anything. Leaning in closer, he caught the faint, clean scent of cheap soap and laundry detergent. Keeping up his relentless act, he pointed out that she was still wearing a shirt. Biting her lip, she quietly pleaded that it was her last layer and she couldn't take it off. Chen Huiyan simply nodded. He decided not to push her any further, but he noticed something intriguing. A normal girl would look at a guy with absolute disgust after such an invasive search, but Lin Nianchu only looked deeply embarrassed. In that moment, Chen Huiyan realized she didn't hate him, and might have even harbored a secret crush on him all along. It was completely unexpected, considering they had never spoken or even made eye contact in their past lives. The realization made his head pound as he remembered how agonizingly dense his younger self had been, completely obsessed with pleasing his toxic crush, Shen Xiyu. He cringed at the memory of spending sleepless nights over Shen Shiyu's hot and cold games. Shaking off the thought, he took 2 steps back and asked if she had anything hidden in her pants. The girl obediently pulled both her pockets inside out. Ignoring her gesture, Chen Huiyan glanced at the wall clock. Only a few minutes had passed, meaning the car that was destined to hit her hadn't even reached the intersection yet. He needed to buy more time. Claiming that empty pockets proved nothing, he crouched down, pretending he was going to search her shorts himself. Lin Nianchu instantly panicked. Breathing heavily, she froze in terror. Expecting this exact reaction, he offered her a choice. Either she could jump up and down to prove nothing would fall out, or he would search her with his own hands. Knowing she was in the wrong for stealing, Lin Nianchu had no room to argue. Choosing the lesser of 2 evils, she slightly raised her arms, nervously gathering her strength for a jump. As she hopped in place, Chen Huiyan intended to stare at the ground, but his eyes instinctively drifted upward. Fortunately, she was staring intently at her feet and completely missed his wandering gaze. After she hopped a second time, he quickly told her to stop, joking that she was making him dizzy. Still trembling, she quietly reminded him that she hadn't lied about the 3 loaves of bread and had already returned them. With nothing left to hide, she quietly asked if she could leave. Seeing her turn toward the door, Chen Huiyan desperately racked his brain for another excuse and shouted for her to stop. She turned back, clutching her broken backpack to her chest, her beautiful eyes filled with caution. Softening his tone, he asked if she was really that hungry. When she lowered her head in silence, he tore open one of the loaves and handed it to her, ordering her to finish it before she left. The storage room fell completely silent as she stood frozen, staring at the floor like a student being punished. Looking at her frail figure that seemed like it could be blown over by a gust of wind, he forcefully shoved the bread into her hands, pointing out that he couldn't sell it now anyway. After a few hesitant seconds, Lin Nianchu slowly brought the bread to her mouth and took a small bite. Soon, she was eating faster and faster. Suddenly, heavy tears began to fall like broken pearls, splashing onto the floor. Despite being caught and humiliated during the search, she had stubbornly held back her tears. But the moment the food hit her stomach, her emotional defenses completely crumbled. Watching her silently, Chen Huiyan tore open the second loaf and placed it into her empty hand. He reached into his pockets for a tissue, only to silently curse his 17-year-old self for not carrying any. Though he had no idea what her family situation was, it pained him to see a top-tier student reduced to stealing cheap bread just to survive. By the time she polished off the second loaf, her eyes immediately darted to the third. Without waiting for him to offer, she walked right over, tore it open herself, and began to eat. Still chewing, she opened her bag, pulled out a pen and paper, and quickly scribbled down an IOU, stating that on August 30th, 2010, she owed Chen Huiyan 3 loaves of bread. When he took the note, he completely froze. The handwriting was identical to the anonymous ballot that had voted for him as the class sports representative last semester. In a flash of realization, he understood that Lin Nianchu had been his silent supporter all along, not Shen Xiu. In his past life, he had wrongly assumed Shen Xiu cast that vote, doubling his efforts to win her over while she happily exploited his dedication. Because his family owned a supermarket, Shen Xiu had constantly freeloaded drinks, snacks, and even sanitary pads from him. Disgusted by the memory, he slammed the IOU on the table and asked Lin Nianchu if she really thought a simple note would settle her debt. Bracing for the worst, she nervously asked how he wanted to resolve it. Waving his hand, he told her he was only joking and ordered her to follow him so he could replace the backpack he had ruined. Still guarded, she immediately declined, insisting she could just sew the broken strap herself. Refusing to take no for an answer, Chen Huiyan firmly stated that he despised owing people favors and led her straight to the bag aisle. He noticed her eyes instantly lock onto a pretty pink backpack. Grabbing it off the shelf, he shoved it into her hands. When she stubbornly tried to put it back, claiming her old bag was already broken anyway, he threatened to spread the rumor about her stealing at school if she didn't accept it. Defeated, Lin Nianchu pulled the bag back down. With a bitter expression, she pulled out her IOU and added the expensive backpack to her debt, clearly overwhelmed by how she would ever pay him back. Amused by her tragic expression, he chuckled and told her that since she was already writing IOUs, she might as well follow him again. As he stopped in the stationery section, he felt a sudden bump against his back. He turned around to find Lin Nianchu stumbling backward, rubbing her forehead. Teasingly warning her to watch her step, he grabbed a pink pencil case and tossed it into her arms. The moment she saw the price tag, she aggressively refused, blurting out that she simply didn't have enough money to ever repay him. Cutting her off, Chen Huiyan gave her an intrigued look and casually mentioned that she didn't have to pay him back with money. She could always find another way to repay him. Tilting her head, Lin Nianchu's imagination clearly ran wild. Catching his teasing grin, she quickly averted her eyes, though her bright red ears gave her away. He then led her down another aisle, but the moment she realized where they were, she turned around in utter embarrassment and tried to flee. Chen Huiyan barked at her to stop, reminding her that, as the school's resident bad boy, he wouldn't hesitate to ruin her reputation if she didn't listen. Warning her that bad students were capable of anything, he finally forced her to turn back around. Stuttering, she insisted she didn't need any sanitary pads. Pretending to calculate on his fingers, he boldly pointed out that between the one in her bag and the one she had hidden, she was completely out of supplies. Leaving her absolutely speechless, he laughed, grabbed a premium pack of pads, and tossed it right at her. Flustered, she fumbled to catch it, staring at him in sheer disbelief. After meticulously adding the item to her IOU, she discreetly lifted the package to her nose, her eyes widening in wonder as she realized it actually smelled nice, unlike the cheap, unbranded ones she normally used. When they finally reached the exit, Chen Huayan strictly instructed her to watch out for cars and get home safely. He promised that as long as she behaved and showed up to school tomorrow, the entire stealing incident would remain their little secret. Though Lin Nianchu had no idea why he was so concerned about her commute, she quietly accepted the deal. Nodding obediently, she held the IOU out with both hands, softly asking if he would keep his end of the bargain. He confirmed he would. But just as he pulled the supermarket doors open, he was greeted by 3 cheerful girls. It suddenly clicked. In his past life, Shen Xiu and her friends had arrived exactly half an hour after Lin Nianchu left. Realizing that the real voter and the fake voter were now in the same room, Chen Huayan decided it was the perfect time to settle the score. He quickly stopped Lin Nianchu from leaving, telling her to stay and watch a good show. Back in high school, Shen Xiu had masterfully strung him along, never accepting or rejecting him but happily taking all his gifts. She claimed they were in an observation period, forcing him into a pathetic routine of sneaking his father's inventory to her. A move so spineless that even his 14-year-old sister despised him. It wasn't until much later that he discovered she had secretly been dating a senior for over a year. That betrayal had finally crushed his spirit, pushing him to focus entirely on his career. By his early 30s, he had built a multi-million-dollar empire, while Shen Xiu had ended up as a divorced single mother. Looking back, he realized how utterly ridiculous he had been for wasting his youth on such a manipulative woman. Snapping back to reality, he watched as Shen Xiu noticed him standing next to the socially invisible Lin Nianchu. Smirking sarcastically, she teased him for talking to the class outcast and boldly demanded to know who was prettier. Completely unbothered, Chen Huayan coldly replied that Lin Nianchu was just a customer, then asked what Shen Xiu wanted to buy today. Overhearing this, one of Shen Xiu's friends gasped in surprise, amazed by how massive his family's supermarket was. Basking in the attention, Shen Xiu proudly confirmed it and generously told her friends to grab whatever they wanted, insisting it was all on her. Thrilled by the VIP treatment, the 2 girls immediately raided the snack aisles. A few minutes later, they dumped a massive pile of junk food onto the checkout counter, while Shen Xiu casually tossed in her usual gum and sodas. She bossily ordered Chen Huayan to pack it all into 2 large bags. He readily agreed, but instead of just bagging the items like he used to, he picked up the scanner and began scanning every single barcode. Shen Xiu froze, demanding to know what on earth he was doing. Chen Huayan calmly replied that he was scanning the prices, pointing out that they were here to buy things. Behind her, the 2 girls nervously whispered, confused because Shen Xiu had promised it would all be free. Utterly humiliated, Shen Xiu lashed out, accusing him of being incredibly stingy over a few cheap snacks. Chen Huayan burst into laughter, throwing her own words back at her. He mocked her, asking why she couldn't afford to pay for such cheap snacks when she had just loudly bragged about treating her friends. For a moment, Shen Xiu was completely speechless. Standing off to the side, Lin Nianchu blinked in sheer astonishment as she watched the drama unfold. Suddenly, Shen Xiu slammed her hand on the counter, glaring at Chen Huayan and warning him that she was genuinely getting angry. Unfazed, he mockingly asked if her anger gave her the right to rob his store in broad daylight. Caught off guard, Shen Xiu suddenly jumped to a conclusion. She accused him of being petty, assuming he was acting this way because he had seen her hanging out with the class monitor at the mall the day before. She quickly defended herself, insisting that bumping into the monitor was just a coincidence. Chen Huayan coldly cut her off, stating that he had slept at home all day and hadn't been to the mall. Frustrated, she demanded to know what his problem was. Shrugging effortlessly, he declared that paying for groceries was perfectly normal, even turning to Lin Nianchu for backup. But feeling incredibly guilty for her own theft earlier, Lin Nianchu nervously looked away, feeling utterly unqualified to answer. Sensing the extreme tension, Shen Xiu's friends awkwardly suggested they just drop it and leave the snacks behind. They tried to comfort Shen Xiu, telling her it wasn't worth fighting over. But refusing to lose face, Shen Xiu dropped her ultimate trump card, proudly announcing that the class monitor had confessed his feelings to her yesterday. Chen Huayan simply chuckled. With devastating accuracy, he guessed that she had neither accepted nor rejected the boy, but instead fed him a generic line about focusing on their studies until graduation. Completely exposed, Shen Shiyu flew into a panic, demanding to know what he was implying. Ignoring her outrage, Chen Huayan bluntly told her to either pay up or put the food back. Before her friends could reach for their snacks, Shen Shiyu blocked them. Furious, she shamed Chen Huayan, asking if this was how he proved his love for her, and threatened to accept the monitor's confession the very next day. In response, Chen Huayan just started a slow clap, mockingly singing her congratulations. Watching from the sidelines, Lin Nianchu almost burst out laughing, but quickly turned her head away when he glanced at her, her eyes flashing with panic. Deeply humiliated, Shen Shiyu dragged her friends toward the exit, screaming that he would definitely regret this. Just as they reached the door, he sharply ordered them to stop. For a split second, Shen Shiyu looked hopeful, thinking he was finally apologizing. Instead, he slammed his hand on the counter and coldly ordered them to put all the merchandise exactly back where they found it. Shen Shiyu's jaw dropped. She stood frozen, her hands shaking as tears of sheer humiliation welled up in her eyes. Knowing Chen Huayan's reputation as a delinquent, her terrified friends frantically restocked the shelves before rushing back to drag Shen Shiyu out of the store. With the parasites finally gone, a wave of immense satisfaction washed over him. Clutching her new backpack, Lin Nianchu quietly approached him, whispering that she was going to leave now. Instead of answering, Chen Huayan picked up a delicate hairpin from the counter and gently clipped it into her messy hair. Stunned, it took her a few moments to react before she frantically pulled it out, insisting she couldn't take it. He gently explained that it was a thank you gift for secretly voting for him as the sports representative last year. Her eyes immediately darted away in embarrassment. A few seconds later, she shoved the hairpin back into his hand and sprinted out the door. Chasing her to the door, he yelled out a strict warning, threatening to report her to the school if she dared to run near the street. Though she didn't look back, she immediately slowed her pace to a safe walk. He couldn't help but smirk, realizing that the threat of exposing her theft was the ultimate weapon against the brilliant student, giving him plenty of leverage for the future. When the new semester officially began on September 1st, Chen Huayan checked the class rankings and was shocked to find himself in second to last place. The dead last spot belonged to the top scholar, Lin Nianchu, who had scored a 0 simply because she missed the final exams. Because of their terrible rankings, Lin Nianchu naturally became his new deskmate. Their homeroom teacher, Zhou Zheng, glared at Chen Huayan, harshly warning him not to disturb her studies or bully her in any way. Feigning innocence, Chen Huayan shamelessly poked Lin Nianchu's arm and asked the teacher if that counted as bullying. The girl's ear instantly turned bright red as she shyly shrank away. Furious at the blatant disrespect, the teacher grabbed a disciplinary stick and swung at him, but Chen Huayan easily dodged the blow and swaggered to his seat. With the whole class watching, a deeply embarrassed Lin Nianchu kept her head down and quietly followed him to their desk. Her other earlobe turned red as well. Taking my seat at the back row by the window, I watched as Lin Nianchu focused intently on her textbook. Suddenly, I rested my head sideways on her desk, brazenly admiring her beautiful eyes. Startled, she gripped her pen tightly and quickly lowered her head to avoid my gaze, staring nervously at her toes. With both of her earlobes now bright red, she anxiously urged me to go back to my own seat. But the more flustered she got, the happier I felt. It wasn't until our teacher, Zhou Zheng, slammed his hand on the podium that I finally looked away from her face. Even then, my eyes continued to observe her with absolute zero restraint. After a minute, Lin Nianchu couldn't take it anymore and asked what I was staring at. I casually replied that I was just wondering why her mouth was so small. Hearing this, she pressed her lips tightly together, trying to hide them, and turned her head away. I finally retracted my gaze, pulled a bag of hot meat buns from my backpack, and handed it to her, telling her to eat them during the long break. When she tried to refuse, I shot her a playful threat, leaving her with no choice but to obediently take the bag. She glared at me with annoyance in her pretty eyes, but I just smiled, satisfied that she was finally listening. I told her that being obedient was all that mattered. Just then, Zhou Zheng smacked the podium again, reminding everyone to prepare their textbooks for the upcoming English class. He cast an uneasy glance toward our corner by the window, pointing a finger at me in a fierce, silent warning before finally leaving the room. Meanwhile, our English teacher, who had been waiting at the door with her lesson plans, walked in after sharing a polite nod with him. The moment she stepped into the classroom, everyone's eyes were immediately drawn to her stunning legs and black pantyhose. Her name was Wen Wanwan, and she had only recently graduated. While she wasn't stunningly beautiful, she had a delicate, clean look, complemented by a great figure and a warm personality. She was clearly eager to bond with her students. As the bell rang, I pulled out my English textbook and stared at the pristine portrait on the first page. My fingers itched to draw dark circles and a little mustache on it, but I forcefully held my right hand back. I reminded myself that I had to study hard in this new life, cursing my terrible muscle memory. Lin Nianchu turned her head to observe my weird struggle, but she didn't say a word. She was probably used to the boys in our class acting a bit crazy from time to time. She had often seen me walking normally, only to suddenly jump into the air and mimic a basketball shooting motion like I was having a spasm. Whenever that happened, she would stop and stare at me in confusion, then quickly lower her head and walk past to avoid being caught looking. Since then, she had realized just how strange I could be. Whenever I passed a trash can, my hand would instinctively twitch. Whether it was a crumpled piece of paper or an empty bottle, I had to toss it in a perfect parabolic arc. And if that perfect shot missed, things would get incredibly awkward. I would panic, run over to pick up the trash, return to my original spot, and shoot again. Once, I spent an entire recess missing shots, driving myself absolutely crazy. Sitting inside the classroom, Lin Nianchu had turned her head and watched my ridiculous hallway antics with a blank, yet deeply fascinated expression for the entire break. Snapping back to the present, I was about to say something to her when Wen Wanwan suddenly called on me to read the first paragraph of the text aloud. I stood up and naturally began reading. The moment the first word left my mouth, Wen Wanwan's expression shifted completely. Surprised, she looked up from her book, and the entire class turned around to stare at me. Lin Nianchu looked at me in pure shock, her beautiful eyes fixed on my face as she marveled at my flawless, authentic British accent. Wen Wanwan habitually leaned against a nearby desk, bending one leg slightly, a movement that immediately caught the eager eyes of Ma Qiming in the corner. Astonished, she asked if I had gone abroad over the holiday, though she quickly reasoned that even that wouldn't explain such rapid improvement. I seriously replied that I had simply been studying hard, declaring my determination to get into a good university. Hearing this, a fleeting look of surprise and joy flashed through Lin Nianchu's eyes. Wen Wanwan beamed with delight, telling me she was incredibly happy to hear about my ambition and that she believed in me before asking me to sit down. I had definitely shown off perfectly this time. In my previous life, I had expanded my business overseas, forcing myself to practice spoken English daily. Filled with excitement, I instinctively slapped my thigh in triumph, but ended up slapping Lin Nianchu's leg instead. Terrified, she immediately shrank back. Driven beyond her limits of patience, she raised her small fist and punched me right in the arm, glaring at me with fiery eyes. She angrily threatened to tell the homeroom teacher. I quickly defended myself, insisting it was a genuine mistake and that I meant to hit my own leg. Honestly, her little punch didn't hurt at all. It actually felt kind of nice. I patted her arm lightly, proposing a deal. I would help her practice her spoken English, and she could tutor me in other subjects. She didn't respond right away, but after a short while, she slid a piece of paper over, quietly agreeing to my request. When class ended, I reminded her to eat her food. Instead, she took out the buns and offered them back to me with both hands, claiming she wasn't hungry. I reminded her that I never ate breakfast and ordered her to eat them quickly before I got angry. Hearing my firm tone, she finally untied the plastic bag, brought a bun to her lips, and took a small, cautious bite. The moment she tasted the meat filling, her eyes lit up. Her next bite was significantly larger, and she polished off the first bun in just a few bites. Suddenly realizing that she might be eating too aggressively, she looked up at me with a bashful expression, her earlobes turning pink again. I watched her with complete satisfaction. Taking care of her felt exactly like raising a daughter. After she finished the second one, there were still 2 buns left in the bag. She stopped, claiming she was full and wanted to save the rest for lunch. I immediately shut that down, telling her to stop talking nonsense and just eat them. For a brief moment, she glared at me with a cold, defiant look, seemingly ready to rebel against my dictatorial attitude. I leaned in close to her face, playfully threatening her consequences if she kept glaring at me. Intimidated, she quickly opened the bag again and obediently took a bite of the third bun. However, her chewing slowed down significantly, almost as if she couldn't bear to finish it so quickly. Watching her, I figured that being tough with her was the only way to make her listen. Suddenly, Shen Xiu walked over to my desk. Seeing her approach, Lin Nianchu's expression turned cold. She shifted her body away to focus on her food, but she clearly kept her ears perked up, sneaking a quick glance at the other girl. I bluntly asked Shen Xiu what she wanted. She told me to step outside because she had something to say. But when she reached the door and realized I was still sitting firmly in my seat, she accused me of becoming increasingly unreasonable. My patience immediately vanished. I shot back, asking her what her problem was, and told her to speak right there because I was too lazy to move. Reluctantly, Shen Xiu walked back over. Since there were too many people around, she couldn't speak loudly. Lowering her voice, she warned me to stop pushing my luck, explaining that she had only agreed to Zhao Zimo's confession as a joke to scare me. Glancing cautiously in Zhao Zimo's direction, she whispered that she didn't actually like him. Hearing this, I bluntly asked if she liked me instead. Her small face instantly flushed red, and she nervously stammered that we were still too young. She insisted that we couldn't date until after graduation. Suddenly, Lin Nianchu interjected with a cold voice, warning us that the teacher was coming. Annoyed, Shen Xiu stomped her foot and had no choice but to return to her seat. When noon finally arrived, Shen Xiu tried to ask me out to lunch, but I rejected her flat out, leaving her to walk away alone. I then turned my attention to Lin Nianchu. She always went to the cafeteria so late. I genuinely wondered what she even ate, or if she ate at all. Seeing her completely engrossed in her studies, I rested my head on the desk and waited for 5 minutes. Soon, the rhythmic sound of my snoring echoed softly in the quiet classroom. Lin Nianchu turned her head and noticed that drool was about to slip from the corner of my mouth. Flustered, she quickly pulled a tissue from her pocket, folded it neatly, and carefully wiped my lips. Deep down, she harbored a secret that no one knew. She had actually known me since middle school. Her mind was filled with countless precious memories of us, even though she was fully aware that I didn't remember any of them. To her, it seemed like I had probably never even noticed her back then. But to her, it didn't matter, as long as she remembered. Overwhelmed by her thoughts, she couldn't resist raising her delicate fingers to gently touch my cheek. But the moment my snoring paused, she retracted her hand in a panic, sitting bolt upright with her heart pounding wildly in her chest. It wasn't until my snoring resumed that she finally breathed a sigh of relief. After sitting quietly for another moment, she gently stood up. It was finally her usual time for lunch. By the time she reached the cafeteria, the other students had long finished their meals, leaving the dining hall completely empty. The cleaning staff had already started wiping the tables. Lin Nianchu silently walked up to the food counter. Seeing her, the short-haired cafeteria lady sighed, asking the little girl why she was so late again. She gently scolded her, reminding her that at this hour, all the dishes were gone and only the leftover gravy remained. Lin Nianchu offered a polite, timid smile, saying it was fine and that she would just eat plain white rice. Hearing this, a long-haired worker nearby recognized her and proudly pointed out that Lin Nianchu was the top student in her grade, explaining that she was late because she had been studying hard. The short-haired lady broke into a warm smile, looking at Lin Nianchu with deep admiration. She praised the girl for looking like a beautiful fairy while maintaining such incredible grades, wishing her own son was even half as excellent. Out of sheer kindness, she piled a generous portion of rice onto her tray and drenched it in savory meat broth, telling her that she would only charge her 50 cents for the entire meal. After swiping her meal card, Lin Nianchu silently noticed the balance. She only had $5.20 left. Even a 50-cent meal was a bit of a luxury for her, but she had learned the hard way that without food, she wouldn't have the energy to study. Carrying her bowl of rice, she found a quiet corner and began eating slowly, making sure not to waste a single grain. At that exact moment, I suddenly snapped awake, only to find Lin Nianchu's seat empty. Looking at the clock, I realized I had actually fallen asleep for half an hour. I knew there wouldn't be any real food left at the cafeteria at this hour. Rushing over, I immediately asked the short-haired lady if a very pretty girl had just come by to eat. The lady confirmed it, sighing that the poor girl always studied so late that she only ever got left with plain white rice. I bought some food, sat down, and began piecing things together. It became painfully obvious that Lin Nianchu only ate plain rice for lunch. Her intense studying was nothing more than a cover-up, a convenient excuse to arrive when only leftover rice was available. Teenagers have an immense sense of pride, and she was no exception. I understood this perfectly. But what puzzled me was where she actually went after finishing her meager lunch. By the time the first class of the afternoon began, our homeroom teacher, Zhou Zheng, walked in alongside our class monitor, Zhao Zimo. With the autumn sports meet scheduled for September 20th, they came to ask the class for suggestions on our class uniforms. To everyone's shock, all the boys in the room shouted in perfect unison, demanding Japanese-style JK school uniforms. The girls instantly fell silent, their cheeks turning a light shade of pink, though a few, including Shen Shiyu, looked visibly excited. Girls our age rarely wore short skirts, preferring to stay relatively conservative both at home and at school. I glanced over and noticed Lin Nianchu staring blankly at her textbook, completely detached from the commotion. Shifting my gaze, I stayed silent, quietly watching the chaotic scene unfold. Deep down, I absolutely wanted to see Lin Nianchu in a beautiful JK uniform. I wanted to see her enjoy her youth just like every other girl, especially with her incredible natural beauty. I had never even seen her with her long hair down. It felt like God had blessed her with stunning looks but cruelly stripped away her right to show them off. Of course, I was more than willing to pay for it. I had enough allowance saved up in my bank account to buy dozens of outfits. But I also knew that handing her money or clothes directly would deeply hurt her pride. Eventually, Zhou Zheng agreed to the uniform idea, instructing everyone to submit their sizes and $50 to the monitor within a week. When Lin Nianchu heard the price, she lifted her head in shock, but quickly lowered it again in silence to focus on her textbook. Later that afternoon during PE class, I looked over at her and casually announced that she was coming to my house this Saturday to tutor me. She immediately tensed up, nervously stating that she was okay with tutoring, but absolutely refused to go to my house. Smirking, I offered to list a few quiet alternative locations for her to choose from. Option 1, my bedroom. Option 2, a supermarket storage room. Option 3, a private KTV booth. And finally, option 4, a king-sized bed in a hotel room. Staring into my mischievous eyes, she instantly realized that I was deliberately forcing her into a corner. Her face flushed red as she reluctantly agreed to go to my house, but strictly demanded that my family had to be there. I assured her they would be. Without another word, she finished packing her things, hugged her pink backpack to her chest, and gave me a highly suspicious but incredibly cute nod. A wide smile crept across my face, making me feel like I had just successfully kidnapped her. But then again, I quickly brushed off the thought. I had saved her life, which technically meant she belonged to me now. Plus, I genuinely treated her like my own daughter. Seeing that the rest of the class had already left, we hurriedly headed downstairs to assemble. I intentionally slowed down to walk beside her, but she deliberately dragged her feet, keeping a safe distance between us. Deciding not to push it, I slung my blue backpack over one shoulder, shoved my hands into my pockets, and strolled down to the field. With my tall frame leading the way, Lin Nianchu finally sped up a little. From behind, our matching blue and pink backpacks looked suspiciously like couples' gear, a detail that the highly sensitive girl had undoubtedly noticed. After finishing our warm-up laps on the field, Class 28 lined up to face our gym teacher, Sun Ping. He was a tall, thin, and deeply tanned man. Rumor had it that he could do 21 armed pull-ups, making him an absolute beast and the secret crush of our English teacher, Wen Wan. He announced that starting next class, students signed up for the sports meet would begin specialized training, but for today, we had free time. The entire class erupted into cheers, instantly scattering in all directions like a flock of startled birds. But for certain students, the words free time felt like an absolute nightmare, leaving them with no choice but to awkwardly wander around the field or sit alone on the steps in a daze. Lin Nianchu was exactly that kind of person, though she never seemed to mind the isolation. As I sprinted toward the basketball court with a few other guys, she quietly walked over to the concrete steps where we had left our bags. She was incredibly protective of her backpack, even placing a thick textbook underneath it to keep the bottom completely free of dust. Sitting down, she carefully hugged the bag to her chest and opened her book. But instead of focusing on the text in front of her, her gaze automatically drifted over toward the basketball court. During every single free period, she would end up wasting her precious study time by quietly watching the boys play. Over on the court, I was still wearing my school uniform as I dribbled the ball at lightning speed, breaking past Zhao Zimo's defense and sending him stumbling sideways. Charging forward, I took 3 massive steps and executed a brutal slam dunk, leaving the metal backboard violently vibrating. Landing smoothly, I casually cracked my neck. From the steps, Lin Nianchu watched with wide, amazed eyes, while Shen Xiyu and her friends on the sidelines stood completely paralyzed in shock. Looking like a drenched chicken with his messy hair, Zhao Zimo stared at me in disbelief, asking if I actually knew how to dunk. After all, a high school boy who could slam dunk was always a legend. As the undeniable god of the basketball court, Chen Huayan was slightly surprised to find that his strength and jumping ability had noticeably increased since his rebirth yesterday. While it was a pleasant surprise, he couldn't help but wish his IQ had increased instead, knowing that physical strength wouldn't help him get into a good university. Nearby, Shen Shiyu's face flushed red as she complimented his handsome dunk, but he simply gave her a cold glance and looked away. Looking toward the distant steps, his eyes suddenly met Lin Nianchu's. The moment their gazes locked, she quickly turned her head away, tightly hugging her language textbook to her chest and silently moving her lips as if she were deeply engrossed in reciting the text. However, her bright red earlobe gave her away. She was sitting in her usual spot, just as he remembered from every free period in PE class. He couldn't help but playfully wonder why she didn't come closer to watch him play when he was looking so cool. Meanwhile, Shen Xiyu and her 2 best friends were still gazing at him with starry eyes. She repeated her praise about his dunk, her tone implying that receiving a compliment from her was a rare and special privilege. Chen Huayan simply gave a dismissive nod and ignored her. Hearing Shen Shiyu's blatant admiration, Zhao Zimo glared at Chen Huayan in deep jealousy. Tugging at his middle-parted hair, Zhao Zimo aggressively challenged him to a one-on-one match, arrogantly declaring that no one could surpass him on the court. Before Chen Huayan could respond, a teammate joked that the class monitor was just giving him another chance to show off, suggesting that ignoring his dunk entirely would have been a far worse blow. Chen Huayan playfully flipped the teammate off, acknowledging the ruthless tactic. As Zhao Zimo eagerly served the ball and went in for a 3-step layup, Chen Huayan's expression suddenly changed. Looking past the court, he completely abandoned the game, tossing the ball aside as he sprinted toward a crowd of students gathering near the steps. Pushing his way through the tight crowd, he found Lin Nianchu sitting on the ground, clutching her right ankle with a pained expression. The PE teacher, Sun Ping, blew his whistle and demanded to know what had happened. A nearby girl hesitantly explained that she had seen another girl push Lin Nianchu from behind, causing her to tumble down the stairs, but the culprit had immediately run away before her face could be seen. Furious, Chen Huayan cursed aloud, vowing to make the girl pay if he ever caught her. After his loud, unhidden outburst, he immediately knelt beside Lin Nianchu and offered to carry her to the infirmary, silently seething that someone had dared to harm the girl he had just worked so hard to save. A few female classmates quickly helped Lin Nianchu to her feet. Hopping on one leg, she stared hesitantly at Chen Huayan's broad back. Annoyed by her delay, he turned his head and impatiently ordered her to climb on. Biting her lip in embarrassment, Lin Nianchu finally opened her arms. As her upper body gently pressed against his back, the sheer rage on his face instantly melted into deep calmness. Seeing him frozen in a squatting position, the PE teacher frowned and asked if she was too heavy, offering to carry her instead. Terrified by the idea, Lin Nianchu quickly tightened her grip around Chen Huayan's neck, her ears burning red with intense shyness. Clearing his throat, Chen Huayan quickly made up an excuse, claiming his leg had just fallen asleep, before finally standing up. Supporting her legs firmly with both hands, he carried her to the steps and leaned down so she could grab her backpack. After taking a few more steps, he had her pick up his bag as well, instructing her to drape it around his neck. Whispering right next to his ear, Lin Nianchu softly warned him that the heavy bag would hurt his neck. Worried that her arms would get too tired carrying both bags, he sped up his pace toward the infirmary, completely unaware of the bright, spring-like smile blossoming on the young girl's face behind him. Along the way, he interrogated her about who had pushed her, asking if she had seen the culprit's face or if she had any suspects in mind. When she remained silent, he accurately guessed that she was simply afraid he would violently retaliate against them. Upon arriving at the infirmary, he carried her in circles but couldn't find the school doctor anywhere. Left with no other choice, he carefully set her down on a white examination bed. As her toes barely touched the floor, he decided to handle it himself and pulled up a small stool to sit directly across from her. She suddenly clamped her legs tightly together, defensively asking what he was trying to do. He matter-of-factly stated that he needed to check if her ankle was sprained, dislocated, or fractured. Her ears flushed red again as she coldly questioned if he even knew how to do that. Joking around, he claimed he used to set bones for old sows back in his rural hometown. Confused at first, she quickly realized he was comparing her to a pig and indignantly punched his shoulder. Laughing it off, he grabbed her right foot and slipped off her shoe, revealing a perfectly clean white sock as the girl nervously bit her lip. She squeezed her legs together even tighter, but his next question made her so mortified she nearly kicked him. Sniffing the air, he genuinely asked how her feet didn't smell after a whole day in shoes. Even as an aloof and quiet girl, she couldn't hold back and furiously asked if there was something wrong with his brain. Shrugging off her anger, he grabbed her retreating foot once again. When she struggled, he gave her calf a light smack and ordered her to behave. Humiliated, she reluctantly obeyed, glaring at him intensely as he gently removed her white sock. Beneath the sock was incredibly fair skin and a delicate heel. As he gently pressed against her slightly swollen ankle, Lin Nianchu let out a soft groan of pain. When he asked if it hurt, the shy girl gave a small nod. Promising to be gentler, he carefully wrapped both hands around her slender ankle, slowly moving it to check the condition of her bones. A moment later, he visibly relaxed, assuring her that it was just a minor sprain with minimal swelling and could easily be treated with some medicinal oil. After standing up and rummaging through the back drawers, he finally found a half-empty bottle of safflower oil. Sitting back down on the small stool, he rested her right foot on his knee to apply the medicine. However, she quickly pulled her foot away, insisting on applying it herself. Feigning strict authority, he scolded her for being disobedient, causing her leg to stiffen in shock. Seizing the opportunity, he pulled her foot back onto his knee, lecturing her that there was no need to be shy during a medical emergency. But just a few seconds later, Lin Nianchu coldly broke the silence. She questioned why he had taken off her entire sock if he only needed to apply oil to her ankle. Playing dumb, Chen Huayan innocently asked if he had really done that. In response, she simply told him to look at his hands. Looking down, he realized he was holding her discarded white sock in his right hand, while his left hand was firmly gripping her delicate, bare foot. Before he could even admire the sight, she angrily snatched her foot away and grabbed her sock, glaring at him with pure disgust as if he were some sort of creepy foot fetishist. Turning her back to him, she finished applying the oil herself before putting her sock and shoe back on. Grabbing her backpack, she stormed out of the infirmary without a word. Chen Huayan chased after her, desperately trying to explain that his hands simply had a mind of their own sometimes. Ignoring his weak excuses, she kept her head down and continued walking. Since school had already ended, Lin Nianchu mentioned she was heading back to the classroom to study. He let her head toward the academic building while he walked to the shed to grab his bicycle. However, as he wheeled his bike to the front gate, he couldn't stop worrying about her sprained ankle. Having no idea how far she lived, he couldn't bear the thought of her limping all the way home. Letting out a heavy sigh, he reluctantly turned around and headed back to the academic building, deciding he had to take her home. Approaching the window of Class 28, he slowly came to a halt. The classroom was completely empty, and Lin Nianchu wasn't studying at her desk as she had claimed. Instead, she was limping back and forth on the teacher's podium. Clutching a chalkboard eraser, she was standing firmly on her tiptoes, desperately struggling to wipe away the remaining writing on the board. The afternoon's third period had been history, and the tall teacher always loved writing his notes as high up as possible. Because of this, Lin Nianchu was struggling immensely. She stretched her right arm as high as she could, her uniform sleeve slipping down to reveal her slender white forearm, but she still couldn't reach the frantic scribbles at the very top. Chen Huayan's gaze silently drifted toward the duty roster in the corner of the board. Written clearly under the cleaning duties was his own name, Chen Huayan. Back on the podium, Lin Nianchu let her arms drop in utter defeat, realizing she simply couldn't reach it. She stood there, catching her breath for a moment. Taking a deep breath, she hopped up on her good foot, throwing her arm upward in a final attempt to reach the top. But just as the eraser was about to graze the chalk, a large hand suddenly appeared in her field of vision and snatched it right out of her grasp. Startled, Lin Nianchu turned her head, causing her injured heel to hit the floor. The sudden pain made her lose her balance and topple sideways. Reacting quickly, Chen Huayan grabbed her arm and pulled her back to safety. As their eyes met, Lin Nianchu immediately stepped back, looking as guilty as a thief caught red-handed. Nervously, she asked why he hadn't gone home. Instead of answering, he stared at her intently, rhythmically tossing the eraser into the air. Reaching up effortlessly, he wiped away the highest notes with a single swipe, finally cleaning the entire board. Tossing the eraser back onto the podium, an old mystery finally made sense to him. He realized why the teachers had never punished him for ignoring his cleaning duties in his past life. Staring directly at her, he demanded to know if she had been secretly cleaning the board for him every single time. Avoiding his gaze, she immediately denied it, but the clear panic and guilt in her eyes gave her away. She stole a quick, nervous glance at him. Quickly changing the subject, she stated that if he had nothing else to say, she was going back to her studies. She turned to step off the podium, but he immediately caught her arm. He firmly told her to forget about studying for the day, insisting that he was taking her home to rest her injured foot. When she instantly refused, he frowned and asked if her house was far away. She quietly claimed it wasn't. Glancing at her skeptically, he suspected she was lying simply because her strong pride wouldn't let her show anyone where she lived. Deciding not to force the issue, he resorted to his usual shameless tactics, agreeing that he wouldn't escort her home. However, he laid down a strict condition. She was only allowed to study until exactly 6:30. Once the time was up, she had to leave, and he promised to sit right there in the classroom and watch her until she did. Turning back to look at him, Lin Nianchu bit her lip, her eyes filled with deep resentment at his bullying. Defeated, she grumbled that she would just go home right now instead. Flashing a victorious smile, Chen Huayan praised her for finally making the smart choice. As he headed toward the door to wait for her, he suddenly heard a soft rustling sound. Glancing back, he saw Lin Nianchu meticulously wiping the remaining chalk dust off the podium. He couldn't help but silently chuckle. She had completely denied doing his chores, yet here she was, finishing the entire cleaning routine for him. After making sure the podium was spotless, she hoisted her backpack onto her shoulders and practically sprinted past him, keeping her head down to hide her awkward expression. Laughing out loud, Chen Huayan casually followed behind her, finally understanding the true definition of a stubborn, icy tsundere. Walking his bicycle alongside her, they eventually reached the school gates where they were meant to part ways. Still worried, he patted the back seat of his bike, offering one last time to give her a ride and promising it was no trouble. Clutching her sleeves, Lin Nianchu looked at him with genuine conflict, but ultimately refused. She softly explained that if her father ever caught a strange boy approaching her, it wouldn't end well. Lowering her voice, she warned that her father would literally chase the boy down with a wooden stick. Amused, Chen Huayan remarked on how incredibly fierce her dad sounded. A fleeting look of embarrassment crossed her face as she gave a small nod and turned to walk in the opposite direction. Unwilling to let her leave so quietly, he called out, teasingly asking if she lacked basic manners by leaving without saying goodbye. Hearing his complaint, a rare, beautiful smile finally broke through her cold facade. Turning her head, she softly whispered her goodbyes. Standing by his bike, Chen Huayan broke into a warm, almost fatherly smile, silently watching her slightly wobbly, yet steady steps as she walked away. Finally at ease, he turned his bike around and pedaled toward home. Hearing the rattling of his bicycle behind her, Lin Nianchu stopped in her tracks and turned around, her eyes lingering on his retreating figure. She stood there silently, watching until he completely disappeared into the crowded streets. Only then did she turn back toward the brilliant orange sunset. Reaching up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her pure, delicate face was bathed in golden evening light, adorned with a sweet, faint smile. In the fading daylight, one blue backpack and one pink backpack slowly drifted apart, going their separate ways from the gates of Lucheng 7th High School. Across the street, The melodic calls of street vendors selling scallion pancakes and fried rice cakes echoed through the air, perfectly capturing the peaceful essence of youth. But that tranquility didn't last long. As soon as Chen Huayan arrived home, he immediately transformed the living room into his personal stage. Standing on a wooden stool and pointing dramatically at the ceiling, he passionately roared his new life ambitions to his parents, Chen, Tian, and Sushaya. He vowed to study relentlessly, get accepted into a top-tier university, and become the highest-scoring student in the entire city. His mother cutely clapped her hands in support, but his father simply sat at the table, let out a loud sneer, and spat a sunflower seed shell onto the floor. Watching his father's dismissive reaction, Chen Huayan suddenly realized that his young dad bore a striking resemblance to a famous slapstick comedian. The comedian comparison was especially strong, given his father's relentless mocking. Turning to his wife, Chen Tian sarcastically joked that if the worst student in school was allowed to have such impossible dreams, then his own dream of stepping on Bill Gates to become the richest man in the world must be just around the corner. Su Jaya playfully slapped her husband's shoulder, scolding him for talking down to their son and demanding he offer some encouragement instead. Completely unfazed, Chen Tian just sneered again and went back to cracking sunflower seeds. Breaking the tension, Chen Huayan proudly corrected his father, announcing that he had actually ranked second to last on the final exams, proving he was making progress. In pure shock, Chen Tian dropped his handful of sunflower seeds onto the floor. His father stared at him in utter disbelief, demanding to know if it was true. His reaction was entirely justified, considering Chen Huayan had maintained the dead last position for 2 consecutive years. Smirking, Chen Huayan confirmed it was entirely true, cheerfully explaining that he had only moved up a rank because another student had completely skipped the exams. Chen Tian's hopeful smile instantly froze. Tossing his remaining seeds onto the plate, he bitterly complained that listening to his son speak was a complete waste of his precious lifespan. He angrily pointed out that back in his day, he at least managed to score 37 points on a 100-point test, while his son could barely scrape together 20 points on a 150-point exam, lamenting that each generation was truly worse than the last. The room fell into an awkward silence. Hearing his father's proud history of academic failure, Chen Huayan finally understood the genetic root of his own terrible grades. Waving his hand in defeat, Chen Tian grumbled that reasoning with his son was like playing a lute to a cow, announcing he was heading to the family supermarket to manage things. Confused, Sushaya asked if Auntie Liu was already working the shift. Her husband explained that Auntie Liu had just gone back to her hometown because her grandson was born, leaving the store desperately short-staffed. Hearing this, Chen Huayan's eyes instantly lit up. He quickly spoke up, claiming he had the perfect candidate to take over Auntie Liu's job. When his father asked who it was, Chen Huayan eagerly revealed it was a classmate. Chen Tian instantly shot the idea down, arguing that a high school student wouldn't have time to watch the store. Refusing to take no for an answer, Chen Huayan grabbed the stubborn old man's arm and desperately pleaded his case. He argued that his classmate could easily watch the store after school, and as a bonus, his father could get away with paying her a lower salary. Pondering the idea, Chen Tian slowly nodded, noting that if the job ruined the student's grades, his son would have one less competitor to worry about during the college entrance exams. Though deeply amazed by his father's incredibly twisted logic, Chen Huayan forced a bright smile and gave him a big thumbs up, praising his brilliant strategic thinking. As Chen Tian proudly lifted his chin to accept the compliment, Sushaya simply shook her head in the background, mentally accepting that both the men in her family were completely hopeless. Chuckling, his father patted Chen Huayan on the shoulder and told him to bring his classmate in for an interview the very next day. Scanning the living room, I asked where Chen Yidong was. Sushaya, our mother, glanced toward her daughter's bedroom and explained that she and our dad had just scolded her right before I got home. When I asked why, she lowered her voice, revealing that my younger sister had recently been getting too close to a mentally disabled man who hung around the entrance of the 65th middle school. Their teacher had reported it, and the parents were worried she might get bullied. Just then, Chen Yidong's door burst open. The little girl popped her head out and loudly protested that the suspender's uncle was not a bad person. Standing at the door, dressed in a cute pink bear pajama set, she pouted angrily before immediately slamming the door shut again. After listening to my mother explain the situation more clearly, I finally understood my sister's intentions. It turned out that the simple-minded middle-aged man wandering outside the 65th middle school, whom the students mockingly called a fool, was the very same man Chen Yidong affectionately called Suspender's uncle. Hearing that nickname instantly unlocked a memory for me. I had also gone to that middle school, and that same innocent uncle had been wandering outside the school gates ever since I was a student there. Even though the uncle was intellectually disabled, he was actually quite handsome, always kept his clothes clean, and loved wearing a pair of blue suspenders, giving him an unexpectedly endearing charm. However, back when I was in middle school, the other kids loved to bully him. They would throw stones at him, smack him on the back before running away, laughing, or surround him and chant mocking rhymes. Whenever this happened, the Suspender's uncle was always left completely helpless. Unable to stand it, I would often step in and yell at the bullies. But I distinctly remembered a girl from my school who hated their cruelty even more than I did. Once, she even grabbed a broom and charged straight at the group of boys, successfully chasing them all away. In that moment, I thought she looked incredibly cool, like a female superhero protecting world peace. I never learned her name, only remembering that she was very skinny with long, messy hair that completely covered her face. Perhaps because she took such good care of him, the uncle would always break into a bright smile whenever he saw her, looking at her as if she were his own daughter and even dancing around in sheer joy. Staring silently at my sister's bedroom door, a realization suddenly washed over me. Back in middle school, there was already a girl fiercely protecting the Suspender's uncle. Going by the timeline, that girl should be in high school now, just like me, meaning the uncle had lost his loyal protector. In a way, my little sister had stepped into that girl's shoes, inheriting her strong sense of justice to watch over him. With this in mind, I turned to my mother and suggested that she should fully understand the situation before deciding to scold her. Sujaya just gave a light, amused smile. I stood up and made my way to my sister's bedroom. The 14-year-old girl's room was overwhelmingly girly. With a pink bed, pink furniture, and pink stuffed animals, stepping inside felt like diving into an ocean of pink. I could only sigh and joke to myself that she was clearly our parents' biological child, while I must have been picked up from a dumpster. Oddly enough, the overwhelming color scheme reminded me that Lin Nianchu seemed to love pink as well. Hugging a stuffed bear on her bed, Chen Yidong pouted and grumpily asked why I had come in. Leaning casually against the doorframe, I smiled and told her I had a secret to share. I revealed that back in middle school, I was actually on good terms with the Suspender's uncle. I explained that he was a sweet and gentle man who never hurt anyone, but because a lot of students bullied him, I had stepped in to protect him a few times. Chen Yidong looked at me in genuine surprise, amazed that her older brother, who had been labeled a troublemaker since middle school, actually possessed a kind heart. Nodding in agreement, she declared that the uncle was a great person. She then excitedly mentioned that just this afternoon, she had seen an incredibly beautiful girl kindly feeding him rice on the steps across the street. Not entirely sure what to make of that, I simply advised my sister to be careful. I assured her that while I fully supported her protecting him, she had to call me immediately if she ever ran into a situation she couldn't handle, promising I would be there in a flash. Swinging her pale little feet off the edge of the bed, Chen Yidong smiled and nodded. In that moment, she suddenly felt that her older brother wasn't quite as annoying as he used to be. After leaving her room, I headed back to my own and pulled a dust-covered cardboard box from under my bed. Inside were all my textbooks from my freshman and sophomore years of high school. I breathed a sigh of relief that I hadn't sold them to a scrap collector, which was honestly something the old me would have absolutely done. After wiping the textbooks clean, I stacked them all on my desk. I had practically zero foundation in the previous 2 years' curriculum because I had never paid attention in class. I vaguely remembered that my teacher's most common evaluation of me was that I was actually quite smart, but just refused to focus on my studies. This time, I was determined to pour all my focus into studying, just to see if their praises of my intelligence were actually genuine. Unfortunately, staring at textbooks was a surefire way to induce sleepiness. Half an hour later, Chen Yidong, wearing a pair of shorts, pushed open my bedroom door carrying a plate of fresh fruit. Her sweet greeting instantly dissolved into a terrified scream. Inside the room, I was sitting at my desk with a rope dangling from the ceiling, looped around my neck. I was gagging and rolling my eyes, making pathetic, whimpering noises as I desperately fought a losing battle against sleep, taking the ancient tying hair to the ceiling beam to stay awake idiom to an extreme level. On a broader note, my school, Lucheng 7th High, was considered a second-tier key high school in the city. The absolute best was Lucheng 1st High, which boasted a relaxed, free-range teaching style and an astonishing 90% acceptance rate into top-tier universities. In contrast, the 7th High operated on a highly strict, restrictive educational model. Our school's top-tier university acceptance rate hovered around 50%. The next day, I rode my bike to the school gates. In the past, I would always arrive long after the morning reading session had ended, but today it was only 7 in the morning. Grumbling to myself, I pushed my bike toward the entrance, sporting deep, dark circles under my eyes and a vivid red rope mark around my neck. Suddenly, I noticed Shen Xiyu being stopped by a teacher. The teacher scolded her, demanding to know which class she belonged to, furious that she was not only skipping the school uniform but also wearing an unacceptably short skirt. Looking like a guilty child, Shen Xiyu lowered her head. She was dressed in a white t-shirt and a blue pleated skirt that perfectly highlighted her eye-catching, pale legs. Pretending I hadn't seen a thing, I simply pushed my bike through the gates. Glancing up unexpectedly, Shen Xiyu caught sight of my back. She rubbed her eyes in utter disbelief, wondering if the sun had risen in the west since I had actually shown up to school so early. Soon, the bell for the first period biology class rang. With his handsome face smashed against his desk, Fang Yefeng began to snore heavily. Meanwhile, I silently stuffed the steamed buns I had bought into Lin Nianchu's desk cubby, firmly whispering at her to eat them after class and not to give me any excuses. However, her gaze remained fixed on my neck, looking as though she wanted to say something but was holding back. I casually told her not to worry, explaining that I had stayed up studying so late that I had to intentionally choke myself with a rope just to stay awake. Hearing this, she gave me a look of pure disbelief and quietly muttered that she hadn't been worried at all. I just smirked, closed my eyes, and rested my head on my desk. Paying attention in class right now was completely pointless for me. Without a solid foundation, the lesson sounded like absolute gibberish anyway. Resting my head served two purposes: catching up on sleep and silently reviewing everything I had studied the night before. Feeling the warmth radiating from the buns, Lin Nianchu pressed her lips together thoughtfully. Thinking I was asleep, she stealthily tucked 2 of them into the plastic lunchbox she had brought from home. I had completely noticed her little maneuver but chose not to call her out on it. About 10 minutes later, I lifted my head. As if she had rehearsed it 1,000 times in her head, Lin Nianchu immediately turned around. With an incredibly serious and formal expression, she confessed that she had just sneakily eaten 2 of the buns. I casually replied that it was no big deal and asked why she felt the need to report it to me. Utterly embarrassed, she lowered her head and quickly turned her body back around, her earlobes burning bright red. It was incredibly obvious that she was terrible at lying, but for the first time in my life, I found someone's clumsy attempt at deception to be absolutely adorable. At that moment, the biology teacher at the podium announced that a normal human heart rate fell between 60 and 90 beats per minute. He asked the class if they knew how a polygraph machine worked, explaining that measuring a person's pulse was one of its primary methods for detecting lies. He then instructed the students to pair up with their desk mates and practice detecting each other's pulses as a makeshift lie detector test. Feeling a bit bored, I turned toward Lin Nianchu. To my amusement, she nervously hid both of her small hands behind her back, staring at me with high alert. When I asked her what she was doing, she surprisingly took the initiative, boldly declaring that she would be the one to test me. I shrugged and rolled up my sleeve, resting my arm flat on the desk. Hesitantly, she reached out, gently pressing her pale, slender fingers against my pulse. Right at that moment, a girl in the back row suddenly shouted in mock delight, excitedly informing the teacher that Fang Yifeng had a pregnancy pulse. The entire class instantly turned to look. The person who spoke was Fang Yifeng's desk mate, Chen Fei, who I remembered as a hardcore celebrity fangirl. At that moment, her hand was resting on the wrist of the deeply asleep Fang Yifeng, who was currently drooling on his desk, blissfully unaware that he had just been diagnosed as pregnant. Never one to miss a joke, Ma Chiming yelled out, asking if the imaginary baby belonged to Princess Fei. Disgusted, Chen Fei furrowed her brows and told him to get lost. Twitching his mouth in annoyance, the biology teacher scolded them to stop messing around, reminding the class that this was an exercise for detecting lies, not pregnancies. prompting a collective groan of amusement from the room. Smiling again, the biology teacher urged everyone to hurry up and ask their partners a question to see if their pulse accelerated when they answered. Taking her job seriously, Lin Nianchu asked me an incredibly mundane question about whether I liked eating vegetables. I casually replied that it was just okay, before teasingly calling her an idiot and telling her to ask something a bit more exciting. I asked if there was absolutely anything she wanted to know about me, giving her full permission to ask away. Of course, she had plenty of questions, but she didn't dare ask any of them out loud. When she shyly shook her head, I swiftly flipped my hand over, trapping her soft, delicate hand firmly underneath mine. Taking control, I aggressively pushed her sleeve up, revealing a small section of her pale, slender wrist. Just as I was about to press my fingers against her clearly visible veins, she panicked and snatched her hand back. I glared at her, demanding to know if she was still nervous about the whole bun situation, or if there was something else on her mind. She stubbornly refused to let me take her pulse. With a wicked smirk, I declared that if I couldn't feel her pulse, I would just have to listen to her heartbeat instead. Without hesitation, I slowly leaned my ear toward her chest. Completely terrified, the young girl shrank backward until her shoulders hit the classroom wall, leaving her with nowhere left to hide. Seeing her trapped, I curved my lips into a shameless grin and continued leaning in closer. However, knowing exactly where to draw the line, I stopped just short of actually touching her. I announced that I was starting the interrogation. The girl remained dead silent. With a deliberately exaggerated, villainous grin, I asked if there was anyone she secretly had a crush on. The moment those words left my mouth, her ears instantly flushed a deep red. Her beautiful eyes widened in panic as she awkwardly turned her face away, quickly brushing off the question as boring and fiercely denying it. I let out a low chuckle and tilted my head, genuinely trying to listen for her heartbeat. But a moment later, I frowned. I couldn't tell if the classroom was just too loud or if I was still too far away, but I actually couldn't hear her heartbeat at all. Clapping his hands together, the biology teacher asked the class if everyone's lie detector tests had been successful. Feeling a bit defeated, I sat back up in my seat and turned to look at Lin Nianchu's incredibly shy expression. Judging by her reaction, it was highly likely that she did have a crush on someone, though I couldn't be completely sure. After all, just asking that kind of question was enough to make any teenager blush during their school days. The morning classes quickly wrapped up, and lunch break arrived. Wearing her stylish pleated short skirt, Shen Xiu swayed her slender waist as she walked over to the back row, confidently asking if I could finally have lunch with her today. I flatly rejected her, stating that I needed to study, and I genuinely meant it. To prove my point, I pulled out a freshman year textbook and spread it open on my desk. Furious, Shen Xiu stomped her foot, accusing me of putting on an act. She mocked my terrible grades, asking what I could possibly learn now, and accused me of deliberately trying to spite her. Hearing this, Lin Nianchu shot Shen Xiu an icy glare before lowering her head back to her own studies. Annoyed, I slammed my hand on the desk and pointed straight at the classroom door, warning the girl to leave on her own before I embarrassed her by kicking her out. Looking incredibly wronged and on the verge of tears, Shen Xiu was quickly pulled away by her best friend. Once everyone else had left the room, only Lin Nianchu and I remained. At one point, Lin Nianchu turned her head and realized that I was actually studying seriously, even using different colored pens to make neat highlights in my doodle-filled textbook. She couldn't help but press her lips together into a gentle smile. But the second I glanced over at her, she instantly snapped her head back around, awkwardly flipping the pages of her book to look busy. Time ticked by minute until Lin Nianchu's usual late lunch hour finally arrived. She stood up from her chair, and at the exact same moment, I stood up as well, stretching my arms lazily. I sighed contentedly, mentioning how productive the session felt before casually guessing that the cafeteria probably didn't have any good dishes left. Ignoring me completely, Lin Nianchu slung her backpack over her shoulder and silently walked out of the classroom. Taking my time, I followed right behind her. When we reached the cafeteria counter, I stared in pure disbelief as the short-haired lunch lady charged Lin Nianchu only 50 cents for a bowl of white rice, but turned around and charged me $2 whole for the exact same thing. Licking my lips, a surge of irritation bubbled up inside me. I indignantly called out to the lady, but the moment she fixed me with an icy, warning glare and demanded to know what my problem was, I immediately chickened out and muttered that it was nothing. Quickly saving face, I complimented her out of nowhere, telling her she looked great today. I then walked over to Lin Nianchu's table and took the seat directly across from her. The young girl glanced up at me briefly before lowering her head to take tiny, quiet bites of her plain rice. Reaching into my backpack, I pulled out a massive stash of snacks I had brought from my family's supermarket and piled them onto the table. I proudly declared that I knew studying late meant missing the good cafeteria food, so I came prepared. I ripped open the packaging for several chicken legs, braised eggs, and sausages, arranging them neatly on my tray. But just as I was about to dig in, I deliberately stopped. Faking a sigh, I complained that I had no appetite today, wondering aloud if I had just eaten too much junk food recently. Without waiting for a response, I reached across the table, grabbed her plain tray, and pushed my snack-filled plate directly in front of her. I casually announced that we were swapping lunches for the day. Lin Nianchu shot her head up in absolute shock. I quickly gestured for her to start eating, but she just sat there, staring at me in stunned silence, too nervous to say a single word. Ignoring her hesitation, I lowered my head and began happily eating from her tray, deliberately taking bites from the exact spot she had just eaten from. Watching me in silence, her long eyelashes fluttered rapidly. Putting on an incredibly exaggerated and highly punchable expression of pure bliss, I loudly praised the food, playfully asking why her plain rice tasted so much better than mine. But despite my obnoxious teasing, Lin Nianchu had absolutely no desire to hit me. Instead, she quietly picked up her chopsticks and finally began to eat. She whispered something incredibly soft, but I pretended I didn't hear a word. A long moment later, after wiping my plate completely clean of every last grain of rice, I casually brought up a new topic. I told her that my family's supermarket was short a cashier for the evening shift, and I was officially notifying her that she had just been hired. Lin Nianchu looked up at me, stunned for the second time that day. Maintaining my domineering attitude, I pointed a finger right at her, aggressively stating that her salary would only be half of what a normal employee made. I issued a strict warning, threatening her with mysterious consequences if she dared utter a single word of complaint or tried to refuse the job. Staring at me quietly for a moment, she then straightened her posture with utmost seriousness. Looking at me exactly as an employee would look at their boss, she gave a firm nod and earnestly promised that she had no complaints and was more than willing to take the job. Satisfied, I told her that was settled. Visibly happier, she lowered her head and continued her meal. However, she only ate a single braised egg and about half of her rice. To my absolute bewilderment, she then pulled out her plastic lunchbox, placed it on her lap, and carefully scraped every single remaining piece of chicken, sausage, egg, and rice into it. Dumbfounded, I asked her what she was doing. Without missing a beat, she softly replied that she was saving it to give to her father. I felt like my ears were playing tricks on me. Staring at her in total disbelief, I asked if she seriously planned to leave the school campus right now just to deliver leftovers to her dad. She gave a gentle, confirming nod. Noticing the deep disapproval written all over my face, she quietly set her chopsticks down, immediately stopping her attempt to pack the food away. She sat there stiffly, her expression incredibly awkward, looking as though she was waiting for me to snatch the snacks back or issue another harsh command. She was smart enough to know that I had given her the food out of kindness for her own well-being, not to feed her deadbeat father. The truth was, I already harbored a massive grudge against the man. What kind of useless father forces his own teenage daughter to steal bread from a supermarket to survive, and now expects her to haul her own cafeteria leftovers to him? A wave of intense, unexplainable fury surged rapidly from the very bottom of my heart. Honestly, if I hadn't been trying so hard to protect Lin Nianchu's fragile pride, I would have marched straight over to her house and violently settled the score with him a long time ago. She was such a beautiful, fiercely intelligent girl with perfect grades. If she were my daughter, I would have spoiled her to the ends of the earth. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I felt so utterly frustrated that I instinctively slammed my fist down hard on the table, cursing out loud. The sheer force of the blow made both of our metal trays violently jump into the air. Startled by the sudden outburst, Lin Nianchu jolted in her seat. She lifted her head, looking at me with absolute sheer terror in her timid eyes. Without any warning, 2 large teardrops spilled over her lashes and rolled silently down her cheeks. In a heartbreakingly soft whisper, she apologized. Lin Nianchu quickly wiped away her tears with her sleeve. She meticulously picked out all the snacks from her lunchbox, placed them on the tray, and pushed the tray back toward him. Utterly confused by her actions, Chen Huayan asked what she was doing. Keeping her head down, she softly replied that she was already full and sincerely thanked him for the food. Not wanting him to misunderstand or think she was throwing a tantrum, she looked up and forced a smile that looked even more painful than her crying. Exasperated by the stubborn girl, Chen Huayan almost laughed out of sheer frustration. Pushing the tray back to her, he pointed out that he never said she couldn't take the snacks home, insisting that they were meant for her. He pleaded with her to at least finish the chicken leg and save the rest for later. She firmly declined, claiming she was simply too stuffed to eat another bite. Hearing her weak excuse, Chen Huayan felt a sudden urge to pinch his own philtrum, so infuriated that he felt dizzy from a lack of oxygen to his brain. But deciding there was nothing he could do, he silently admitted that her filial piety was a good trait, blaming her father instead for putting her in such a difficult position. Adjusting his attitude, he finally agreed to let her pack the food away, consenting to her lunchbox disguise. Lin Nianchu silently looked up. Checking his expression, Chen Huayan forced a wide, friendly smile to prove he wasn't angry. Only then did the young girl feel safe enough to place the snacks back into her lunchbox, wrap it in a plastic bag, and carefully stow it in her backpack. Before leaving, she stood up and gave him a gentle bow. In his mind, he repeatedly begged her not to say the cursed phrase, "You're a good person," desperately hoping to avoid being friend-zoned. Fortunately, she remained silent. Watching her retreating figure as she left the cafeteria, he let out a long, heavy sigh. Exiting the school gates of Lucheng 7th High School, Lin Nianchu turned left and quickened her pace. She hadn't lied to him the day before. Her home really was quite close to the school, located near Lucheng 65th Middle School. However, instead of heading straight home, she walked directly to the gates of her former middle school. After crossing the street, she spotted a middle-aged man in blue overalls sitting on the curb of the greenbelt opposite the school. He sat perfectly upright with a straight back, looking exactly like an obedient elementary school student listening to a teacher. His eyes were glued to the school gates, as if he were terrified of missing someone leaving school. Seeing this, the usually aloof Lin Nianchu broke into a bright smile and quickly ran over, her heavy backpack bouncing with every step. Taking advantage of his distraction, she tiptoed up behind him, her playful demeanor making her look like a mischievous child again. Step by step, she quietly approached and quickly tapped him on the shoulder. The handsome middle-aged man sharply spun around, looking left and right. Seeing no one, he turned back, only to be greeted by a pure, blooming smile right in front of his face. "Dad!" she called out happily. Seeing his daughter, the middle-aged man excitedly shouted her nickname, Nianian. But almost immediately, his excitement turned into panic. Like a child caught making a mistake, he quickly stood up, bowed his head, and began apologizing profusely, chanting that he was sorry for missing her after school. His tone was incredibly childish, resembling a 5- or 6-year-old. His fingers twisted nervously, and his expression was full of deep grievance. Quickly helping him back down to the curb, Lin Nianchu gently comforted him. She sweetly explained that he hadn't seen her only because she had run too fast. Mimicking her words like a toddler learning to speak, the handsome man repeated that Nianian ran very fast, so fast that Daddy couldn't catch her. Looking at him with profound gentleness, she pulled her lunchbox and a clean pair of chopsticks from her bag, announcing that it was time to eat. Propping his hands on the steps, the man happily kicked his legs like an excited child. But before feeding him, Lin Nianchu pulled out a tissue and her water bottle. Wetting the tissue, she carefully wiped the dirt from his face, her tone playfully scolding him for getting his face so dirty again. The man apologetically muttered her name. Smiling softly, she assured him that she wasn't angry. Opening the lunchbox, she wrapped a tissue around the chicken leg bone and handed it to him. He cheered excitedly but didn't reach out to take it. Instead, he looked at her with anxious urgency, rushing her to eat first before the bad guys could catch them. She quickly reassured him that she had already eaten 2 whole chicken legs. Adopting his childlike tone, she urged him to eat quickly before the imaginary bad guys arrived. Using her chopsticks, she lifted a bite of rice to his mouth. Opening wide, he eagerly swallowed the rice before taking a massive bite of the chicken leg. Chewing happily, he swung his legs in pure delight. He excitedly asked if it was good, but almost immediately forgot and asked if Nianian had eaten yet. Singing her words like a sweet lullaby, Lin Nianchu patiently answered him again. She promised him again that she had already eaten 2 whole chicken legs, agreeing that they were very delicious. Just then, a little girl with short hair skipped out of the middle school gates. Holding a freshly bought pineapple bun, she was about to cross the street when she noticed the pretty older sister sitting with the overall-wearing uncle again. Watching them for a moment, the little girl smiled, turned around, and happily skipped back into the school with her bun. She silently concluded that the pretty sister had beaten her to feeding the uncle today. Shortly after 1 in the afternoon, Lin Nianchu returned to the classroom with her backpack. Finding Chen Huayan already at his desk studying, she surprised him by initiating a warm afternoon greeting. Shocked by her sudden change in attitude, he stared at her as if he had just seen a ghost, making her feel slightly awkward. Noting her bright mood, he asked if she had enjoyed her lunch. She gave a blissful, soft smile. Realizing her happiness came from sharing the food, he stared at her blankly, finally giving a small, defeated nod. He scoffed, utterly speechless. Faced with such incredible filial piety, how could he possibly criticize her? Changing the subject, he instructed her to follow him to his family's supermarket after evening study hall, explaining that his father was waiting to interview her for the job. Her pretty face immediately turned to him in pure shock. Raising an eyebrow, he told her not to be nervous, casually mentioning that although his father was missing a few screws in his head, he was easygoing and wouldn't make things difficult for her. Breathing a sigh of relief, Lin Nianchu admitted that she had never had a job interview before and had no idea how to prepare. But then, she softly asked why he would speak so disrespectfully about his own father, questioning what he meant by missing a few screws. With a strange expression, Chen Huayan bluntly declared that he didn't just want to insult his own father. He wanted to insult hers too, stating that her father was missing 10 screws. The moment the words left his mouth, a small, forceful fist slammed heavily into his chest. Unlike her previous weak slaps, this punch genuinely hurt. Stunned, he looked up and saw the young girl glaring at him with bloodshot eyes, tears rapidly welling up. But almost instantly, her expression shifted to deep conflict as she looked away, silently acknowledging that he didn't know the truth about her situation. As she quietly apologized, the atmosphere grew incredibly tense and silent. Rubbing his aching chest, Chen Huayan took a deep breath and sincerely apologized as well, admitting that knowing how much she cared for her father, he shouldn't have insulted him. Lin Nianchu quickly turned her head away to hide her falling tears. In that moment, an overwhelming wave of sorrow and grievance completely consumed her. His single comment had inadvertently unleashed years of pent-up pain, the heavy shadow of her past threatening to suffocate her. Despite everything, she had never given up, always believing she was incredibly strong. But hearing the boy beside her offer words of comfort, she finally realized she had only been pretending to be strong all along. The tough exterior she had built instantly shattered. Hidden beneath her hair, her tears flowed uncontrollably. Unable to bear the sight, he gently admitted that he truly didn't know her family's situation, but suggested that if her father had a specific medical condition. Lin Nianchu instantly cut him off. She fiercely declared that her father was perfectly normal. Realizing he had crossed a line, he nodded and wisely closed his mouth. It was obvious she strongly refused to discuss the matter, but seeing how fiercely she protected her father, he began to suspect that the man wasn't a deadbeat after all. There had to be a deeper reason. For the remaining 4 afternoon classes, Lin Nianchu stayed completely silent. Wanting to talk to her but discouraged by her cold demeanor, he eventually gave up. However, during evening study hall, an unexpected event shocked the entire school. The teacher supervising Class 28 that night was the young English teacher, Wen Wanwan. Sitting at his desk, Ba Qiming was completely ignoring his homework, grinning wickedly as he shamelessly admired Wen Wanwan at the podium. Suddenly, his vision went completely black as the entire classroom was plunged into absolute darkness. The students gasped in shock, turning toward the windows only to realize the entire campus was pitch black. Taking full advantage of the chaos, the class clown, Gao Qiang, roared excitedly, announcing a massive school-wide blackout. Instantly, Class 28 erupted into a chaotic symphony of ghostly wails and wild howling. Young and inexperienced, Wen Wanwan had no idea how to handle the sudden madness, desperately slapping the podium, ordering everyone to quiet down and return to their seats. Right on cue, a piercing shriek echoed through the dark room. Someone dramatically screamed that a pervert had touched their leg. Wen Wanwan's face turned completely rigid with anger, instantly recognizing the scream belonged to a boy purposely trying to stir up trouble. Completely giving up, she slumped into her chair, utterly incapable of controlling the chaotic class. Hidden by the darkness, the teenage boys and girls were secretly thrilled, desperately hoping a romantic scene straight out of a movie would happen to them, like someone suddenly grabbing their hand, or leaning in for a sudden kiss in the dark. If this were a teen romance drama, the female lead would inevitably have a severe fear of the dark, giving the male lead the perfect opportunity to swoop in and show off his protective instincts. Right on cue, a loud thud echoed from the back corner near the window as Chen Huayan dropped to his knees. He hadn't expected to be the one cursed with the crippling fear of the dark. He wondered if he had accidentally picked up the heroine's script. When he was 6 years old at his family's rural home, he had wandered out in the dark to use the bathroom and tumbled into a pitch-black, dry well. He had sat trapped in that terrifying darkness for an entire night, all while his careless father assumed he was sleeping safely in his bed, happily dreaming away with his wife. Because of that trauma, he had never slept without a light on since. Now, kneeling on the classroom floor, his chest felt incredibly tight, panic completely overwhelming him as he imagined shadowy tentacles reaching out to grab him. Suddenly, an angelic voice pierced through his panic, calling his name. The aloof girl who had ignored him all afternoon was now calling out to him in genuine anxiety. A school-wide blackout during evening study hall was the ultimate teenage thrill. Even decades later, whatever happened in this darkness would undoubtedly be a colorful highlight in everyone's youth. Out in the hallway, the grade director, Ji Hao, was wildly flashing his flashlight, barking angry orders left and right. He yelled at students hiding in the shadows, ordering them back to their classrooms, and angrily demanded to know what a boy and girl were doing together in the corner. Listening to the director's furious yelling, Wen Wanwan sighed heavily, completely surrendering to the chaos from her podium. But suddenly, her body stiffened in sheer terror as a dark shadow flashed past her, and she felt a hand brush against her calf. The young English teacher instantly leaped to her feet. Terrified, she scrambled out of the classroom and fled toward the teacher's office, her high heels loudly clicking down the hall. She completely abandoned any attempt at maintaining discipline, leaving the chaotic class to fend for itself. Still half kneeling on the floor, Chen Huayan slowly raised his hand, struggling desperately to catch his breath. The air suddenly grew thick with an overwhelming stench of foot odor. Someone had clearly taken off their shoes in the chaos. The suffocating darkness, the intense panic, and the putrid smell all crashed down on him at once. His fear of the dark was a severe psychological trauma he hadn't been able to shake even in his 30s. Suddenly, the aloof girl anxiously called his name again. His brain snapped back to reality for a brief moment as a faint, clean fragrance wafted from beside him. In the dim shadows, he could just barely make out Lin Nianchu crouching beside him. She immediately asked if he was afraid of the dark. He was stunned by how quickly she recognized his exact symptoms, acting as if she had dealt with this many times before. Before he could fully process her question, she quickly helped him to his feet. The moment he was standing, a soft, warm little hand slipped perfectly into his. With practiced ease, she firmly gripped his hand, her voice incredibly gentle, speaking to him as if comforting a frightened toddler. Taking the lead, she gently guided him forward while he obediently followed close behind. He didn't know why, but even though they were still surrounded by pitch-black darkness, simply holding that warm little hand made his fear begin to fade. He couldn't help but think that if someone had held his hand like this 12 years ago in that dry well, he wouldn't have been afraid that night either. Guiding him out of the hallway and down the stairs, Lin Nianchu led him straight to the wide-open space of the sports field. A bright, beautiful full moon hung perfectly in the night sky, blanketing the grassy field in a layer of silvery light. Though their surroundings were still dark, just looking up at the glowing moon made him feel significantly better. Utterly exhausted, he collapsed onto the grassy field, his body completely soaked in a cold sweat. Glancing at him, Lin Nianchu decided to stay and watch over him. She quietly sat down beside him, gently wrapping her arms around her legs. She softly explained that people with nyctophobia shouldn't stay in cramped, dark, or stuffy spaces, noting that looking at bright objects usually helped calm them down. Smiling softly, she pointed up at the moon. Bathed in the pale moonlight, her pure, delicate smile was breathtakingly beautiful, making her look like a pure white angel. He knew she didn't actually want to smile, but she was doing it just to comfort him. Attempting to distract him further, she initiated a conversation, asking if he knew that the moon didn't actually produce its own light, but merely reflected the sun's rays. He bluntly replied that her choice of topic was painfully obscure and boring. Pressing her lips together, she silently turned her head away, letting the atmosphere fall quiet again. After all, they had just been fighting a few hours ago. Breaking the silence, he asked how she knew so much about his symptoms. She quietly revealed that her father also suffered from a severe fear of the dark. Her voice growing heavy, she explained that he couldn't sleep without a small nightlight turned on. The mention of her father immediately reminded him of their bitter argument from earlier that afternoon. Realizing the truth, Chen Huayan rested his arms behind his head, understanding why she had spoken to him in that gentle, childlike tone. He asked if she had grown so accustomed to comforting her father that it had become a natural habit. Suddenly, realizing they shared a connection through the same trauma, his resentment toward her father vanished entirely, knowing firsthand the immense suffering the man endured. Breaking the tension, he playfully called her Comrade School Beauty and asked if she was still angry with him. Sitting tightly curled in a ball, she looked incredibly small and adorable. She remained completely silent, ignoring his question. When he pushed her to answer, she simply shot him a quiet glare and kept her mouth shut. Assuming she was still furious, Chen Huayan quickly hatched a plan. A few moments later, Lin Nianchu heard a low, pained groan coming from beside her. Turning around, she gasped in horror as she saw him curled up like a shrimp, his entire body trembling violently. Panicking, the terrified girl immediately scrambled over, desperately grabbing his shoulders to see what was wrong. She tried to sit me upright. By the time she managed it, my face was covered in sweat, though it was actually just from running earlier. Pretending to be terrified, I grabbed Lin Nianchu's arm with a trembling hand and whimpered that I was scared. Repeating the word with deep concern, she was at a loss for a moment before looking up at the moon for light. Having no other choice, the slender girl used all her strength to pull my heavy frame up, shifting backward so my upper body could rest securely in her embrace. Reaching out her small hands, she gently turned my head, telling me to look at the moon. But at that moment, I had absolutely no interest in looking at the sky. With her soft, fragrant embrace right behind me, I wouldn't have cared even if the moon goddess herself were up there. Still faking my tremors, I shamelessly rubbed backward against her. A gentle breeze blew past, carrying her faint, sweet scent and leaving me feeling completely euphoric. She softly asked if I was feeling any better, but I just kept whining that I was terrified, causing her to look around anxiously. Just as she was about to get up to grab a flashlight, I suddenly grabbed her arm, softly calling her name. She quickly turned her head, assuring me that she was right there. Looking at her anxious face, I put on a pitiful expression and asked if she was still mad at me. She immediately shook her head, admitting she had only been angry for a single second. Hearing this, I casually replied, "Oh, is that so?" To her absolute bewilderment, I calmly sat up, casually scratched my nose, and told her not to worry because I was completely fine. When she just stared at me blankly, almost as if to prove my point, I laughed and started doing a ridiculously goofy shoulder dance right in front of her, proudly declaring how energetic I was. Realizing she had been tricked, her expression instantly turned cold. Furious, she raised both hands and shoved me hard in the chest. Caught off guard, my eyes went wide as I fell backward. In a moment of panic, I grabbed her arm. With a startled gasp, she was pulled forward by my falling weight, landing flat against my chest. Her beautiful eyes widened in shock as we found ourselves staring at each other from inches away. Our reflections were clearly visible in each other's eyes. Right at that exact moment, the massive floodlights in all four corners of the sports field suddenly flickered back to life. The power was back. The red rubber track and the green turf were instantly illuminated by the blinding light. But what truly shocked us was that we weren't the only ones on the field. Hundreds of teenage couples were frozen in place all around us. Some were holding hands, some walking side by side, and others standing face to face, though none were in a position quite as wild as ours. Not far away, 6 stern-looking middle-aged men slowly walked onto the track, turning off their flashlights in perfect unison. It was the head and vice-head directors from all 3 grades. Director Ji Hao barked out a harsh order, commanding everyone to freeze and truthfully report their names and classes one by one. But no one was foolish enough to listen. The entire field instantly erupted into chaos as students scrambled away in every direction under the glaring lights. Reacting quickly, I wrapped one arm around Lin Nianchu's slender waist, used my other hand to push myself off the ground, and gently set her on her feet like a delicate doll. Grabbing her arm, I dragged her into the fleeing crowd. If a top student like her got caught, the absolute minimum punishment would be calling her parents. Even though we were completely innocent, I knew full well that if I tried explaining to Ji Hao that I just had a fear of the dark, the old man would just laugh in my face. Furious that everyone was running, he let out a high-pitched roar, ordering everyone to chase us. Meanwhile, he limped slowly from behind, occasionally clutching his backside, clearly suffering from a painful flare-up of hemorrhoids. Amidst the stampeding crowd, Lin Nianchu panted heavily, unable to tear her gaze away from my broad back. Her mind uncontrollably replayed the intimate moment from just seconds ago. Even though it had been brief, the memory kept her delicate earlobes burning red. Glancing back, I caught her looking at me. I flashed her a bright, confident smile before turning my head to keep running. We finally managed to escape to the hallway of our senior year's class 28. Seeing that 3 or 4 other couples had actually been caught filled me with a twisted sense of glee. A pure survivor schadenfreude. Just as we were about to walk into the classroom, Lin Nianchu suddenly stopped and called my name. When I asked her what was wrong, she nervously suggested that she should go in first, and I should wait 3 minutes before following. Realizing how thoughtful she was being, I agreed and told her to go ahead. Lowering her head, she quickly slipped past me. I went to the restroom to kill some time before finally returning to the classroom. Our English teacher, Wen Wanwan, stood at the podium with a dark, unreadable expression. In a rare display of anger, she slammed her hand against the desk, demanding to know why a simple power outage had caused everyone to completely lose their minds. The entire class sat in dead silence, everyone feeling a bit guilty. Meanwhile, our homeroom teacher, Zhou Zhang, stood at the door, glaring at the students like a wild beast. Still fuming, Wen Wanwan scanned the room, desperately trying to figure out who had caused trouble in the dark. Suddenly, she locked eyes with Ma Ximing in the corner. The class study committeeman was staring seriously at his homework, radiating such an overwhelming aura of righteousness that Wen Wanwan immediately looked away, convinced that such a principled kid couldn't possibly be the culprit. Taking her place at the podium, Zhou Zhang slammed his hand down furiously, sarcastically praising the students for being so capable. He then ordered Gao Cheng to bring his parents to school the next day. Looking utterly devastated, Gao Cheng stood up. Meanwhile, Fang Yifeng was sitting in his seat, miraculously wide awake. Chewing on his finger with a handsome, Sherlock Holmes-like expression, he carefully scrutinized everyone within a 5-meter radius. Just moments ago in the dark, someone had stolen a kiss from him. He had already beaten up Ma Qiming, but the guy denied it to the death, meaning the real culprit was still out there. Turning his head, Fang Yifeng noticed his fangirl desk mate, Chen Fei, blushing furiously like a tomato. Oblivious, he asked if she was running a fever and told her to drink more hot water, receiving a stiff thank you before the conversation ended. Continuing his intense investigation, he began to deeply suspect Liu Buneng. As Zhou Zheng proceeded to scold several other students one by one, Lin Nianchu and I managed to slip by completely unnoticed. Both of us felt a secret thrill, though for entirely different reasons. Thanks to the power outage, evening self-study ended early. After packing her bag, Lin Nianchu followed me to the bicycle shed. I bluntly asked if she was nervous about the job interview. She immediately nodded. I told her not to sweat it, advising her to just imagine my dad's head as a giant radish. I told her that no matter what he said, all she had to do was smile, nod, and agree. Lowering her head, she pressed her lips together, clearly amused by the imagery. I loved seeing her smile. She was breathtakingly beautiful when she wasn't so guarded. It was just a shame that she always kept such an icy expression. Pushing my bike out of the shed, I noticed the girl silently walking alongside me with her backpack. Surprised, I patted the back seat of my bike, asking why she was choosing to walk when she had a ride. Looking at the massive crowd pouring out of the school gates, she froze, nervously gripping her uniform pants, and stubbornly shook her head. When I pressed her further, she shyly turned away, clutching her backpack straps, and silently continued walking ahead of me. That's when it finally clicked. The girl was just embarrassed. After all, there were countless eyes at the gate. If anyone recognized the notoriously cold campus beauty sitting on the back of my bike, the rumors would undoubtedly explode across the school tomorrow. Remembering how another girl had secretly pushed her down the stairs before, I silently cursed myself for being so careless. Lin Nianchu had a certain reputation at school. If people were willing to bully her, they were definitely willing to spread nasty rumors. Understanding her concern, I deliberately slowed down my pace, pushing my bike from a safe distance behind her. Sensing my thoughtful gesture, her anxious heart finally relaxed a little. We kept a safe 20-meter distance, walking one after the other. Every now and then, she would peek over her shoulder to make sure I was still following, and I would tilt my head and smile back. After turning a few corners, the streets were finally clear of our classmates. I hopped onto my bike, pulled up beside her, and told her to get on since no one was around to see us anymore. Obediently, she walked around and carefully sat side saddle on the back seat. Teasingly, I warned her that if she didn't hold on to me, she would definitely fall off. Hearing this, her long eyelashes fluttered as she slowly reached out her pale little hands. Like a timid thief, she barely pinched the fabric of my uniform jacket between her fingertips. Utterly speechless at her hesitation, I just kicked off and accelerated the bike. Instantly losing her balance with a soft gasp, she panicked and threw her arms around my waist, hugging me tight, her pink fingernails turning white from the force. Since no one was watching, and there was nothing going on between us anyway, what was the big deal about holding on for a bike ride? Of course, I was completely oblivious to the secret thoughts hidden deep in the girl's heart. With her head bowed and her ears burning red, she maintained her tight embrace. If it had been anyone else riding the bike, she probably wouldn't have cared so much. But the person sitting in front of her was Chen Huayan. She never could have imagined that the boy she used to only secretly watch from a distance during the 10-minute breaks was now giving her a ride. Hidden from the world's prying eyes, the girl's bashfulness slowly gave way to a rare, genuinely happy smile. Deep down, she wished the world could just stop in this perfect moment. Yet, she painfully reminded herself that while happiness could belong to anyone else, it would never belong to her. She had been cursed by misfortune since childhood. Oblivious, I casually hummed a Jay Chou song, leisurely pedaling toward my family's massive supermarket. Lin Nianchu looked up curiously, asking what song I was humming. I replied that it was one of Jay Chou's, but she said she had never heard it before. Tilting my head slightly, I suddenly remembered that the song wouldn't be released until 2014, and we were currently in 2010. Letting out a wistful chuckle, I had almost forgotten that I had been reborn. My biggest wish in this second life was to get into a good university, making up for the regret of missing out in my past life. I thought about how all those Rebirth novels always featured protagonists blindly diving right back into entrepreneurship. It was such a cliché. If you got a second chance, why waste all your energy just chasing money again? The greatest gift of being reborn wasn't the chance to exploit financial trends. It was getting your youth back. My primary goal was simply to enjoy my teenage years. Sure, I wouldn't say no to making money, but that could wait until after I graduated high school. Honestly, if I could somehow manage to test into the same university as Lin Nianchu, that would be a dream come true. But I knew it was probably just wishful thinking. Her grades were destined for the top prestigious universities. Suddenly, I squeezed the brakes hard. Caught off guard, Lin Nianchu yelped in surprise. Bumping against my back, she recovered just as I stared deadly serious at the red light across the intersection. Ignoring everyone around us, I loudly proclaimed my grand ambition. Lin Nianchu, I refuse to be dead last anymore. I'm going to study hard and get into a top university. Pedestrians waiting at the crosswalk instantly turned their heads to stare at us. Mortified, the girl behind me ducked her head. her earlobes burning red, and whispered that she would do her best to tutor me, begging me to just pedal because the light had turned green. For the first time, my overwhelming lack of social anxiety genuinely made her want to hit me. After navigating the streets, we finally arrived at the supermarket. Four Seasons Fresh Market was one of the largest grocery stores in the Wangjiang Road area. After Lin Nianchu hopped off, I parked my bike at the entrance and told her to wait outside while I went in to give my dad a heads up. She stood exactly where I left her, nodding obediently, though her fingers anxiously twisting her sleeves completely betrayed her nerves. After all, she wasn't just meeting a potential boss, she was meeting my father. Even though she knew it shouldn't hold any special meaning, she was still incredibly anxious. Walking into the store, I spotted my dad, Chen Tian, holding a clipboard, taking inventory of the goods on the shelves. "Dad!" I roared at the top of my lungs, causing him to flinch violently. Seeing his face turn around, looking hilariously like a frustrated comedian, I couldn't hold back a laugh. I told him I had brought the applicant, warning him to just go over the basics and avoid asking too many questions. Grumbling, he walked out to see which poor student had been delayed by my awful grades. As we stepped outside, Lin Nianchu immediately spun around. Her long eyelashes fluttered nervously as she stammered a greeting. Hearing her polite but panicked voice, Chen Tian's expression froze. He forced out a stiff hello, but immediately grabbed my arm and dragged me back inside the store. Smacking me, he demanded to know where the hell I had kidnapped such a stunningly beautiful girl, complaining that he thought I was bringing a boy. He asked if I wasn't terrified her father would hunt me down. I casually replied that she was just my desk mate. Chen Tian immediately flicked me hard on the forehead, arguing that a girl with such elegant grace clearly came from a wealthy family and couldn't possibly need the money. He instantly accused me of tricking her into it. Without waiting for an answer, he bent down to take off his shoe to beat me. My muscle memory instantly kicked in, and I quickly dodged away, insisting that I hadn't lied and that she was doing it voluntarily. Furious, Chen Tian charged at me, yelling that it still wasn't right and ordering me to send her away, terrified that my antics would ruin his business. He landed a solid kick on my backside, booting me right out the front door. Stumbling out in an incredibly awkward pose, I scratched my head in embarrassment. Catching the scene, Lin Nianchu quietly said she would just head home. She lowered her head, her lips twitching into a forced, unnatural smile, and turned to walk into the darkness. Surprised by her sudden reaction, I quickly chased after her and grabbed her arm, telling her to wait. Forced to turn sideways, the girl desperately hid her reddening eyes beneath her hair, forcing out an unconvincing smile as she claimed it was getting late and her father would worry. I realized she must have heard the shouting from inside, though she likely couldn't hear the exact words. Only that my father and I were fighting. Her heart was always deeply sensitive and burdened by an inferiority complex. She had come here filled with nervous anticipation, but the moment she heard us arguing, she immediately blamed herself, assuming she was the cause of the conflict. I glanced back at the supermarket without letting go of her arm. Staring into her eyes, I firmly told her to wait just a little longer, threatening playfully that I wouldn't be nice if she tried to run off. Assuring her that real men didn't solve problems by arguing, I let go of her arm and marched straight back to the supermarket entrance. With a swift kick, I busted the door open. Standing by the cash register, Chen Tian turned around, annoyed, asking if I had a death wish. But I held up 4 fingers, staring at my father with utter seriousness. I struck a deal. If he let her work here, I would rank in the top 40 of my class in the upcoming monthly exam. Hearing this, Chen Tian's anger completely vanished. Squinting his eyes, he studied me with immense interest. Slapping his clipboard down on the counter, he boldly countered, "Top 30." Surprised, I raised an eyebrow and immediately started haggling, offering top 39. He didn't budge. I offered 36. Still unyielding, he repeated top 30. I finally compromised at top 35. Excitedly pointing his finger at me, Chen Tian smiled and declared it a deal, though I muttered a complaint about him scamming me. Glaring at me, he reached for his shoe again, prompting my immediate tactical retreat as I agreed to the terms. He warned me that if I failed to hit top 35, the girl was out, and he meant it. With 53 students in the class, jumping to the top 35 meant moving up at least 500 spots across the entire grade in just over a month. Just as I turned to go bring Lin Nianchu inside, my father's voice casually called out from behind me, asking if I liked her. I stopped dead in my tracks, just barely turning my head. He sneered, telling her to save her breath because someone like that would never look twice at him, no matter what he did. Ignoring Shen Shiyu's shallow remark, Chen Huayan knew his feelings for Lin Nianchu were incredibly pure. He practically viewed her as a daughter and refused to act like a desperate lapdog. Stepping outside the supermarket, he found Lin Nianchu obediently waiting, but instead of standing under the bright lights where she had been earlier, she had retreated into a dark, quiet corner. Her thin, lonely figure looked incredibly frail. She looked so small that it felt as if a single gust of night wind could sweep her away into the darkness forever. Feeling a sudden pang of sympathy, he joked to lighten the mood, asking if she was standing there just to scare him. She quickly stepped forward. Before he could say another word, he noticed the faint, tear-stained tracks she hadn't completely wiped from the corners of her eyes. Softly explaining that she had moved aside to make room for customers, she let him pull her by the arm back into the brightly lit supermarket. Leading her straight to his father, Chen Huayan told the young girl to follow him for a quick tour. Glancing at her pink backpack, Chen Tian seemed to piece something together but wisely chose not to say anything. Following closely behind, Lin Nianchu quickly pulled a notebook and pen from her bag, looking exactly like a diligent student ready to take notes. Amused, Chen Tian chuckled and told her there was no need for that, assuring her that the job was incredibly simple, especially since she would only be working short shifts in the evenings. Walking behind the two of them, Chen Huayan watched Lin Nianchu's back with the proud, fond smile of a doting father. As they walked the aisles, Chen Tian casually listed off her light duties. Despite the simplicity of the tasks, Lin Nianchu meticulously jotted everything down in her notebook. She was instructed to restock the shelves, operate the cash register, and do some light cleaning during the slow evening hours, specifically ensuring the fresh meat section was kept properly chilled. After finishing his instructions, Chen Tian pointed at a nearby trash can, then looked directly at his son, ordering him to clean it up. When Chen Huayan complained and asked why his dad didn't do it himself, Chen Tian proudly declared that he didn't have to because he was the boss. Returning to the checkout counter, the older man grabbed his jacket and told his son to teach his classmate how to use the register. After his father left, Chen Huayan told Lin Nianchu to wander around and familiarize herself with the store while he wrote out a quick cheat sheet for her. A few minutes later, just as he finished writing, he looked up and saw his father marching right back through the door, loudly cursing that he had forgotten his bag. Chen Huayan ignored him, but soon noticed his father standing completely frozen, staring intently down an aisle. Worried that something had happened to Lin Nianchu, he quickly rushed over. Standing side by side, both father and son were completely stunned. Between the two towering shelves, the young girl was kneeling on the hard floor, meticulously scrubbing the tiles with a dirty rag she had found somewhere. Her small figure looked so quiet, diligent, and entirely focused on silently doing what she believed was expected of her. Touched by the scene, Chen Tian's expression softened deeply. He silently turned his head and whispered, asking who exactly this girl was, a deep sense of complex emotion clear in his voice as he noted what a genuinely good kid she seemed to be. Shooting his son a sharp look, Chen Tian lowered his voice and warned that if Chen Huayan didn't rank in the top 35 of his class, the girl would be fired immediately, with zero room for negotiation. Grabbing his bag, he turned and left. Silently cursing the ruthless old man, Chen Huayan vowed to prove him wrong by breaking into the top 35. Even if it wasn't for Lin Nianchu's sake, he knew he had to start studying hard for the college entrance exams anyway. He only had 1 year left to force his rusty, 30-something-year-old brain to absorb 2 entire years of forgotten high school knowledge. The timeline was incredibly tight, and the task was massive. But unlike his previous life, he didn't dread the thought of studying. This time, he knew exactly what he wanted. Walking over to the kneeling girl, Lin Nianchu turned her head, slowly stood up, and looked at him in mild confusion while holding the filthy rag. Seeing her completely calm expression, he realized she didn't see anything wrong or demeaning about scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees. Approaching her, he couldn't help but raise his hand and lightly poke her smooth, white forehead, teasingly calling her silly for kneeling on the floor when there were mops available. Closing her eyes and shrinking back slightly, she looked up at him with a hint of grievance, softly explaining that a rag was all she could find. Bending down, he gently brushed the dust off her knees, telling her that even so, it wasn't her job to clean the floor like that. Stepping back shyly, Lin Nianchu pointed out that his father had specifically told her to do some light cleaning during the slow hours. Pretending to be strict, Chen Huayan pointed a finger at her and jokingly scolded her for daring to talk back to him. Expecting another poke, she instinctively shrank her neck back and squeezed her eyes shut in fear. But instead of poking her, he grabbed the filthy rag from her hands and tossed it away. He told her the rag was incredibly dirty and demanded to know where it was from. Blushing bright red from his teasing, she lowered her head and finally tossed the rag lightly onto the floor. Leading her past a small door, he told her it was the broom closet, instructing her to go inside, wash her hands, and meet him back at the cash register. After washing her hands, she returned to the front counter to find him pulling crisp red banknotes from the drawer. Holding out 5 100-yuan bills, he told her to hold out her hand. She just stared at him blankly, refusing to take the money. He smoothly lied, explaining that it was a supermarket tradition to pay all employees their wages in advance at the beginning of the month. Looking at him with deep, knowing eyes, she clearly saw right through his lie. Knocking on the table to snap her out of it, he aggressively asked if she was giving him that look because she thought it wasn't enough money. Lowering her head, she quietly insisted that she didn't want the advance and preferred to be paid at the same time as everyone else. Slamming his hand on the desk, he pointed right at her. He fiercely demanded to know if she was daring to disobey the boss, threatening to fire her on the spot. Looking up, her beautiful, calm eyes quietly stared right back at him, her entirely unfazed expression silently challenging his empty threat. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, he casually mentioned that maybe he should let his father know about a certain incident that happened the other day. The moment he subtly brought up her stealing, panic flashed across her small face. She immediately snatched the 500 yuan, clutching it tightly to her chest. Smiling victoriously, he explained that since she worked short hours, her starting salary was 500 yuan a month. He casually added that if she performed well, he might even give her a raise. Leaning forward over the counter, he cheekily suggested that if she found an appropriate way to please the boss, a raise could easily be arranged. The moment the words left his mouth, Lin Nianchu's ears instantly turned bright red. She quickly brought her other hand up, fiercely clutching the money to her chest in absolute defense. Looking incredibly nervous and deeply embarrassed, her mind clearly ran wild. Standing up and hopping onto the counter, he couldn't resist reaching out and ruffling her hair. He laughed, clarifying that by pleasing the boss, he simply meant she should smile more, and more importantly, she needed to tutor him. Instantly looking up with a deeply serious expression, she firmly promised to help him study. He casually brushed it off, stating that tutoring him was already part of her job description, and reminded her to come to his house this Saturday. Pointing at the cash clutched to her chest, he then asked how she planned to spend her very first paycheck. Finally, snapping back to reality, she quickly held out a 100-yuan bill with both hands, insisting she was returning the money she owed him. He gladly took it, but as he put it away, he noticed her face was still flushed and she looked like she desperately wanted to say something. When he asked what was wrong, she whispered in a voice as soft as a mosquito, reminding him that he still owed her 13 yuan and 50 cents in change. Stunned for a moment, he burst into loud laughter, admitting he had completely forgotten. Pulling out the exact change, he handed it to her, and she carefully accepted it with both hands. He jokingly asked if she needed to count it to make sure it was right. She immediately shook her head, her fair cheeks blushing as red as a tomato. He then curiously asked what she planned to do with the remaining money, noting that 400 yuan was a massive fortune for a high school student in 2010. Very seriously, Lin Nianchu explained that she would put 100 yuan onto her cafeteria card and spend another 100 on practice exam papers. She paused, seemingly unsure of what to do with the rest. Prompting her, he suggested she use 50 yuan to buy the new class uniform for the upcoming sports meet. Looking up in surprise, she quickly shook her head and firmly stated she wasn't going to buy the uniform. Leaning both hands on the counter and looking up at the ceiling, Chen Huayan agreed that it was just for walking in a simple parade. But lowering his gaze, he stared directly into her beautiful eyes and sincerely told her that youth only happens once. He warned her that in 10 years, he might regret not studying hard enough, but she would definitely regret not wearing a beautiful dress to her very last high school sports meet. Caught in his warm, smiling gaze, Lin Nianchu looked away, falling into deep thought. Her fingers unconsciously tightened, clutching the crisp red bills so tightly she couldn't bear to wrinkle them. Seeing her deep inner conflict, he didn't feel annoyed, only profound heartache. It was only 50 yuan, yet she was agonizing over it as if it were a life-or-death decision. Offering a compromise, he suggested she buy the uniform first, and after the sports meet was over, he would buy the used dress from her at an 80% discount. She looked at him in total confusion. With a completely straight, serious face, he strictly instructed her not to wash it first, insisting he wanted it unwashed. Later that night, he arrived home to find his parents sitting in the living room, looking at him with incredibly strange expressions. It was obvious, Chen Tian had already told his wife everything about the girl. His father sternly warned him that he was dead serious about the top 35 requirement. Meanwhile, Sujaya was much more interested in something else. She excitedly asked her husband if the girl was really as stunningly beautiful as he claimed. Frowning, Chen Tian asked why he would lie, confirming that she looked like an absolute fairy. Thrilled, his mother declared that she would be the one attending the next parent-teacher conference just so she could see the girl for herself. Curiously, Chen Tian turned to his son. He asked what the girl's parents did for a living, noting that her elegant looks and graceful aura didn't seem to belong to an ordinary family, wondering why she was so desperate for money. Shrugging his shoulders, Chen Huayan honestly replied that he didn't know. Looking at Lin Nianchu's refined appearance, no one would ever guess she was a girl who couldn't even afford a 1 yuan piece of bread. He admitted he was genuinely curious about her family background, but knew that prying too much into her privacy would only push her away. While drinking water, he suddenly noticed the door to his sister's room crack open. The little girl frantically waved him over, calling for her brother. Pulling him down onto her bed, Chen Yidong wrapped her arms around his in a sweet, manipulative embrace. Resting her head affectionately on his shoulder, she sweetly begged him to attend her parent-teacher conference at the 65th middle school the next afternoon. Pinching her little cheeks, he lifted her face and demanded to know what was really going on. Looking incredibly pitiful, she tearfully confessed that she had lied to their parents about making the top 20 last semester, crying that their mother would beat her if she found out the truth. Giving in, he agreed to go, but strictly warned her that this was the very last time. Cheering loudly, she praised him as the best brother in the world. The next morning during the long break, he watched Lin Nianchu walk over to the class monitor, Zhao Zimo, with a 100 yuan bill in hand. After quietly giving him her size, she walked back holding her 50 yuan in change. Shen Shiyu turned around and stared at her in utter shock, completely surprised that the quiet outcast was finally participating in the sports meet parade. She couldn't help but wonder if the girl leading the parade carrying the class sign would be replaced as well. Returning to her seat, Lin Nianchu coldly muttered to the studying boy beside her that she absolutely would not sell the dress to him. Her ears burning bright red, she quickly turned her head away, propping up her textbook to hide her beautiful profile. Chuckling softly, he simply went back to his book. By the second period that afternoon, Lin Nianchu noticed the seat beside her was completely empty. He had clearly skipped class. Having taken off his school uniform in favor of a casual hoodie, Chen Huayan casually strolled toward the gates of the 65th middle school with his hands deep in his pockets. It had been a long time since he last visited, and he couldn't help but remember the man in the blue overalls from his past life. Crossing the street, he found that familiar figure sitting in the exact same spot by the green belt, his posture just as straight and rigid as it had been years ago. Buying 2 lollipops from a nearby convenience store, he walked over and sat down beside the man, casually handing one to him. The man in overalls happily accepted the candy, politely thanking him. But as he turned around, he froze for a second, then his face lit up with pure joy as he repeatedly called out, "Little monk! Little monk!" Chen Huayan broke into a wide grin, incredibly touched to hear that familiar old nickname. Because he had always kept his hair buzzed short in middle school, the man had always called him that. He was amazed that even after 2 years, the man still recognized him. Suddenly, an elderly voice called out from behind, explaining that the man was waiting for his daughter to finish school, but always forgot that she was already in high school. Turning around, Chen Huayan saw an elderly sanitation worker. When he asked if the old man knew him, the worker sat down beside them. The old man sadly confirmed that he did, stating that the man's family situation was incredibly tragic. He explained that despite looking foolish now, back in the 90s, the man had been a highly successful and wealthy boss. Glancing at the handsome man in overalls, Chen Huayan was genuinely surprised to hear about his prosperous past. The old man continued, explaining that the man had been ruthlessly set up in business, leading to total bankruptcy and forcing him to sell his house and car. With a wife, a son, and a daughter, the family of 4 accepted their poverty, believing they could still get by. But their fragile peace didn't last. The wife was diagnosed with leukemia, and without money for treatment, she passed away after a year of agonizing suffering. Chen Huayan sat in stunned silence. The old man recounted how the father struggled to raise his 2 young children alone. But a few years later, fate dealt another cruel blow. Just days before his high school entrance exams, the young son was hit by a car. Thinking he was fine, the brave little boy limped home with the 500 yuan the driver had given him as compensation, only to tragically pass away from internal injuries that very night. Hearing that a child's life was bought for a mere 500 yuan, Chen Huayan felt his breath catch in his throat. The old man sighed heavily, explaining that the back-to-back tragedies completely broke the father's mind, leaving him in his current childlike state. Spreading his hands in pity, the old man lamented that the man's life had simply been too bitter. When Chen Huayan asked about the daughter, the old man shook his head with a bitter smile, stating that she was the most pitiful of all. She was only 3 when the family went bankrupt and had never known a single good day. After her brother died and her father lost his mind, the tiny girl was forced to balance going to school with taking care of her completely dependent father. The old man marveled at how incredibly difficult it was for a child to bear such a massive burden, noting how cruelly tragedy always targets the most vulnerable. Saying that misfortune only attacks those who already suffer, the old man slowly got up and left. Sitting in absolute silence, Chen Huayan turned to look at the man in overalls once more. Standing up, he walked straight back to the convenience store, bought a massive bag of bread, and gently placed it into the man's lap. Just as he stood up, he saw Chen Yidong walking out of the school gates, happily waving at him. It wasn't until the evening study hall had already begun that he finally finished the parent-teacher conference and rushed back to Lucheng 7th High School. As he approached the door to his classroom, he bumped into Lin Nianchu just as she was walking out of the teacher's office. They stopped in their tracks and asked each other where they had been at the exact same time. The sudden, unexpected synchronization made Lin Nianchu lower her head in shy embarrassment. Smiling warmly, he explained that he had been at his sister's parent-teacher conference and asked what she had been doing. Shaking her head gently, she claimed it was nothing. During the study hall, while the other students frantically worked on their homework, he simply read through the theoretical knowledge in his textbooks, knowing that all the teachers had long given up on him anyway. After completely reading through the mandatory math textbook, he closed it and looked around at the underperforming students in the back rows. With 53 students in the class, he realized he needed to defeat at least 18 of them to break into the top 35, though his true goal was much higher. He had absolute confidence in English, knowing he could likely even beat Lin Nianchu, but he was far less certain about his other subjects, especially math and physics. His gaze settled on Fang Yifeng, who was currently fast asleep on his desk. The boy consistently ranked 10th from the bottom, yet in his past life, he had miraculously scored over 600 points on the college entrance exam, becoming an absolute legend. The catalyst for his incredible transformation was their English teacher, Wen Wanwan. Rumor had it that they later married, had a child, and lived an incredibly happy life together. But his turning point was meant to happen in the next semester, all because of a woman. To go from the bottom of the class to scoring over 600 on the college entrance exam in just one semester made the notorious sleep god Fang Yifeng a true legend in my eyes. But snapping back to the present, I walked into the classroom after a quick bathroom break, only to find that Lin Nianchu and her backpack were completely gone. When I asked where she went, a classmate shrugged and said she had just packed up and left. Confused, I looked up at the podium, only to see our homeroom teacher, Zhou Zheng, glaring at me like a ghost. He raised 2 fingers to his own eyes, then pointed them directly at me, silently warning me that he was watching my every move. After evening self-study ended, I rode my bike over to the supermarket. Sitting by the cash register, my dad, Chen Tian, was busy trimming his nose hair with a small makeup mirror. Looking up, he asked if the girl and I got out of school at different times. He mentioned that she had arrived much earlier and was already hard at work, praising her for being 1,000 times more diligent than I ever was. Turning my head, I immediately spotted Lin Nianchu. Dressed in the supermarket's signature red vest, she was walking over carrying a broom and a trash can, with a few stray hairs clinging to her pale, sweaty cheeks. I had always thought our red employee vest was incredibly ugly, but seeing it on Lin Nianchu gave it an oddly cute vibe. No, actually, the girl was just cute. The uniform itself was still hideous. Catching sight of me, she froze for a second before awkwardly shifting her gaze away. Turning to my dad, she politely asked if she should throw away the empty plastic bottles. He casually nodded, telling her to just toss them in the outside bin. Looking deeply conflicted, she quietly pointed out that the bottles could be sold for scrap money. My dad just laughed it off, saying it wasn't worth the effort and telling her to just throw them away. I immediately slapped my hand on the counter right in front of my dad, lecturing him that wasting things was shameful and that every little bit adds up. Turning to Lin Nianchu, I firmly ordered her to find a large sack to collect all the bottles. Hearing this, she nodded happily and eagerly went straight to work. Chen Tian sat there with a dumbfounded expression, completely stunned that he had just been scolded by his own son. Lowering my voice, I told my dad to give her a break. I pointed out that he was only paying her $500 a month, which was hardly enough to justify making her clean the entire massive supermarket all by herself. My dad quickly defended himself, insisting that she had volunteered to do the cleaning on her own and that it wasn't his fault. Honestly, that sounded exactly like something this incredibly stubborn girl would do. Tossing my backpack onto the checkout counter, I walked over to the busy girl, grabbed her arm, and dragged her into a quiet corner. I confronted her, asking if she had secretly gone to the teacher's office to get permission to leave the evening study session early, sneaking out while I was in the bathroom. Caught red-handed, she was completely speechless. Lowering her head, her small hands nervously twisted an empty plastic bottle. Snatching the bottle right out of her hands, I lightly smacked it against the wall behind her, demanding to know why she was suddenly acting mute. I ordered her to speak, bluntly warning her that if she thought working extra hours would get her a raise, she was severely mistaken. Lin Nianchu lifted her head, her beautiful eyes radiating absolute sincerity. She quietly explained that she didn't want a raise at all. She pointed out that if she left school at 9 and finished her shift at 10, she would only be working 1 hour a day, yet she was being paid $500 a month. Lowering her head, she stubbornly muttered that $500 was simply too much money. My brain practically short-circuited on the spot. Utterly baffled, I asked her if she had any idea how much regular employees actually made. She innocently shook her head. She firmly stated that she didn't care what others made. She just knew that she was being overpaid. With unwavering logic, she insisted that if she was given too much money, she had to do extra work to make sure her effort matched her reward. I groaned in sheer frustration, asking her how she could possibly be this impossibly stubborn. Gritting my teeth in annoyance, I raised both of my hands like claws, bringing them dangerously close to her soft, delicate cheeks, dying to pinch them. Staring warily at my approaching hands, she nervously took a step back and immediately issued a threat. She warned me that if I dared to bully her, she would immediately tell my dad. Realizing I could never win against her relentless stubbornness, I gave up. Taking a deep breath, I backed off and simply told her that as long as her work didn't interfere with her studies, she could do whatever she wanted. Seeing that I had finally yielded, a beautiful smile blossomed on her face, and she nodded cheerfully. Watching her turn and walk back to her chores, I felt completely helpless, yet I couldn't stop myself from smiling. Fast forward a year to the day the college entrance exam results were finally released. I managed to rank 7th in our entire school, while Lin Nianchu ranked 3rd in the entire province. The night we checked our scores, I was giving her a ride home on the back of my bicycle. As we rode past the very same supermarket, Lin Nianchu suddenly wrapped her arms tightly around my waist, pressing her face softly against my back. In a quiet, emotional voice, she told me that she didn't think she could ever repay everything she owed me in this lifetime. I gently squeezed the brakes, stopping the bike, and turned around to look at her. Bathed in the soft moonlight, the young girl's earlobes were bright red again, but this time, she didn't shy away from my gaze. Looking up at me, she asked if we would still see each other in university. I froze for 3 full seconds before breaking into a wide, idiotic smile. As a gentle spring breeze swept softly down Wangjiang Road, A blue and a pink backpack hung from the opposite sides of the handlebars, swaying gently together in the wind, almost as if they had just silently fulfilled a lifelong promise on behalf of their owners.